We are the people of Oklahoma Oil and Natural Gas. The home of the rig, the driller, the pump jack, the producer, the Christmas tree, and roughneck. Families 4 generations deep who've made this their life's work. We're proud of our story, and it's time to tell it unapologetically. We don't answer to Silicon Valley or bow to the Beltway. We're not Wall Street or Hollywood. We are Oklahoma. We do more for Oklahoma than any other industry. We employ thousands. We pay our taxes. We do what's right. Our country is stronger because of us. Oklahoma is better because of us. The future is brighter because of us. And Oklahoma is not Oklahoma without us. We are invigorated and resolute. Proud of who we are and what we do, unapologetically. Join us at thepetroleumalliance.com.
Good morning. Welcome. Excited to have the 2020 Petroleum Alliance annual virtual meeting. I would much rather see you guys down in Las Colinas. Hey, Chris, could you do me a favor and turn off your screen just for momentarily? Thank you. Obviously we'd all like to be together this year. It's been a trying year for most of us, but our sponsors and our partners in the Petroleum Alliance step up every year, and I certainly want to take an opportunity to thank them. This year, in 2020, our gold sponsors included Chesapeake, Cimarex, Continental, Devon, Enable, EOG, 4 Point, Gulfport, Insurica, Marathon, Messer Bowers, NFP, Oventive, Rain Capital, and XTO. Those were our series of gold sponsors, followed by their silver sponsors, who obviously everybody's important, every dollar is important, as we all understand. Crawley Petroleum, CVR, DCP, Enbridge, EnergyNet, Halliburton, JMA, Lagoon, Mewburn, Mustang Fuel, One Oak, Phillips 66, Spitfire, SPN Well Service, Tapstone, and the Chickasaw Nation. Bronze sponsors: A&A Tank Truck, Baker Hughes, CompuSource, FlexChem, JP Consultants, Midship Pipeline, Pinnacle Energy Services, Plaster and Wall, Red Bluff, TC Energy, and Unit Valero. Our partners who have been riding with the brand for many years: Amshot, Bitco, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the University of Oklahoma Mewburn College of Earth and Energy. We could not thank those guys enough. During the program today, there'll be several prize drawings from certain of our alliance partners that have sponsored. They're pretty cool gifts, so hang around. It's going to be it was a transparent drawing. We hearing the words transparent about elections and about drawings, this was actually done correctly. The chat and Q&A feature will be on the right-hand side. As always, you'll be able to ask questions, and we'll accumulate them in Q&A. We're going to start this with the first. I'm going to do my best imitation of Vanna White. This is the first thing that's been drawn for. It's a Beats Pill. I think there's another one possibly later in the program, and it was supported by a giveaway. The giveaway was supported by Bitco, one of our sterling partners. Had a relationship with the Petroleum Alliance since 2003. They've worked together with us to meet the insurance and risk management needs of the members of Oklahoma's oil and gas industry for close to 20 years. Very importantly, they provide their programs provide Oklahoma Safety Group dividend program, where you can recover some of your monies you've invested with them. They're pleased to they specialize in risk control and claims services designed to meet the needs of specifically the oil patch. You can find them at bitco.com. And the first drawing of today, the winner is Gary Gore with Gore Nitrogen. So you can contact the Natalie and Lauren and the girls, and they'll get you hooked up. With that said, welcome again. We got a great program. I'm going to hand it off right now for our next segment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lasan, Vice President and General Manager of the Valero Ardmore Refinery. Thank you for participating in the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma's annual meeting. The refiners in Oklahoma appreciate the cooperative spirit that the Petroleum Alliance team continues to grow. We have a long history of working together and see the advantage of collaboration on many common issues. The work that the Petroleum Alliance team has done on our behalf at the Capitol has been very instrumental. There will be challenges in the upcoming legislative session, and we look forward to working with the Alliance team, fellow members, and industry partners in the upcoming months. Common issues that we expect to have continued focus include eminent domain, protecting critical infrastructure, preserving incentives that encourage energy investment, and battling increased regulation and taxes. Let's move forward together to close out a challenging 2020 and work to make a brighter 2021. Oklahoma, and frankly the country, are counting on us. We are all in this together with a common goal of delivering petroleum products that boost human progress and have the ability to lift millions out of energy poverty. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the annual meeting.
Great. Thanks, guys. Chris, you can bring your camera and mic back up. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Okay. I'm going to try to keep these first two segments moving along, but also meaningful. We'd love more time with each of our guests today, but I do want to leave time for questions. We'll do questions for Chris at the end of his segment, and we'll do questions for Ann and John. We'll keep them both up at the same time and have questions up for both. We'll tic-tac-toe back and forth. Cody is going to help me keep track of incoming chat questions, but I do see the screen up here. Chris has a few slides that he wants to hit at the top. I'm going to get us started with his intro. Some of you know Chris Wilson of WPA Intelligence. He's an Okie. He's an OU graduate who works nationally as well as here at home. He gave our morning fuel participants a preview of what was happening on the ground back in September. Chris is absolutely one of the best providers of political intelligence and predictive analytics for campaigns, period. 4 years ago, he was Director of Research and Analytics and Digital Strategy for Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. He helped Cruz win the Iowa caucuses and finish with the most delegates earned by a second-place finisher in the Republican primary since Ronald Reagan in 1976, his challenge of Gerald Ford. He was named Technology Leader of the Year by Campaigns and Elections in 2019. This cycle, he helped State Senator Stephanie Bice top Kendra Horn in Oklahoma's 5th Congressional District. Welcome, Chris. It's good to see your face. And Chris, I've looked at your races for the cycle. You were all across the country. By my count, you were in 20 states and in several key battleground races for the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. Congratulations. I think that you had a very good election night, and you have a great slide deck. So with that, Chris, could you bring us up to date on the election, and then we'll pop to some questions.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The irony of you saying I was named Technology Leader of the Year when I'm struggling with this platform is not lost on me, by the way. Brooke, I'm sorry, but I don't find the slides. When I click on the button for it, there's nothing there. There we go. It's coming up. All right, thank you. So I also, it's probably worth me saying that I put this together yesterday before I got on a plane to come to Washington, D.C., and I think a few races have been called since I landed out here. So I apologize in advance, and I'll try and bring those up to speed as I'm talking. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the presidential election. As Brooke said, I've got about 15 slides here. I'll go through them fairly quickly. And if you look on the right, I always try and add a graphic that people have something to look at while I'm talking. And those are the electoral college maps going back to the 60s. And I went back that far because there were some interesting aspects of this election that I thought were about President Trump's performance that I'll address later. My favorites obviously being 1984 there. But the first element I want to say is President Trump won by 30% those who voted on election day, 59 to 33. And that is, if you look at what happened on election day, I think it was a very different election than what happened up to election day. That's because, though, the coronavirus. 8 in 10 Democrats voted early compared to 6 in 10 Republicans voted early. Joe Biden won the early vote 58-39. So again, Trump won election day vote 59-33. Late deciders broke toward Trump heavily. Among those who decided in October or later, which are 11%, Trump won them by 16 points. So all these people who voted early some of them could have changed their mind. And that's, if I have a complaint about early voting, it's not necessarily that it happened. It's just that there are so many challenges that take place with decisions or new information that enters into the electoral environment in which people don't have the ability to evaluate. Trump won overwhelmingly among non-college white males, 67-27, 40 points. And that was one of the questions, is whether or not he could maintain the lead that he had last time. However, Biden did win seniors, and that's a group that Trump won in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. Now, he only won them by 1 point, so he was able to close the gap there. Most of the national polling showed him up by 10-12. And then the most important point, and I bring this up because if you look at the map on the right, Trump did better with Hispanic men than anybody since George W. Bush. And he did better with African-American males. I'm sorry, he did better with Hispanics overall with anybody, but since George W. Bush, he did better with African-American males than anybody since Dwight Eisenhower. So those who accuse Trump of being a racist, I would just point out he was really bad at being a racist because he was able to increase the Republican vote there better than anyone had done in a long time. So currently, in terms of what's been called, President Trump has 214 electoral votes. Joe Biden has 290. 31 are really still up to grabs to not be called. The only real prize from a standpoint of what I think people were making decisions on nationally was Florida. And it's not necessarily that it was a surprise. I think I predicted when we got together back in September when I spoke to your group. I thought Trump would win Florida. I just didn't expect it to be as overwhelming as it was. And I'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. Georgia has been called by Biden. I would say is likely to be won just because I still think there's going to be a recount and they're going to count all the votes by hand. But I doubt that changes. But President Trump won. If you look at the state overall, it's almost like an entirely red state with the exception of the Atlanta and the suburbs, Fulton County, where Joe Biden secured a much larger lead than Donald Trump was able to 4 years ago. The turnout has been a big story, and it was up. It was up 14% over 2016. And while the turnout from 16 to 20 seems dramatic on its face, and you heard a lot of people talking about it, like for those of you in Texas, you know that Texas, more people actually voted prior to Election Day than voted in all of 2016. But the increase, it was 66.9% of voting age population. 2016 was 60%. But the larger increase was actually from 2012 to 2016, where the percentage of registered voters who participated increased by almost 10%. So while early voting was a record, 101 million people in 2020, compared to the 58.3 million in 2016, it did not cause the overall voting to match the same record. Now, that was to Donald Trump's detriment because you did have Election Day turnout not match those same numbers. And I would argue, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, some of that was probably due to states like Wisconsin, where polling came out right before the election showing Joe Biden up by 17 points. That was catastrophically wrong. He only won by a few thousand votes, and that probably depressed turnout in those areas. Rural and urban divide. I'm going to use Texas as a microcosm here, although this happened everywhere. Even with Biden, and looking at Texas specifically, and I do that because I do a lot of work in Texas, Governor Abbott, Senator Cruz, and it almost is like a small country in terms of its makeup. 16.5 million registered voters, 254 counties, 20 media markets. Even with Biden receiving 291,000 more votes than Clinton in the big four urban counties in Texas, he couldn't overcome the red rural wall. And in those red wall counties, which are all sparsely populated rural areas, Biden performed slightly better than Clinton did, but Donald Trump's margin grew by 215,000 people. Now, the border counties, to me, were the big story. And this is a repeat of what we did with Senator Cruz's campaign against Beto O'Rourke in 2018, although it hasn't really been written about, and it wasn't as dramatic. For the 28 counties that run along the Rio Grande border and the border with Mexico, Biden won 152,000 more votes than Trump, but that's 95,000 fewer than Clinton did in 2016. In 2016, Clinton won by 33%, but Biden only won them by 17 points. So Trump was able to maintain that red rural wall, but also rebuild challenges that exist with Hispanics. The Hispanics overall, this I think is probably the biggest story nationally in terms of what happened with Texas or what happened with the election. And I think a question for the future. In Texas congressional districts 15, 23, which is the Hurd district that most people didn't think was even holdable by Republicans, 28 and 34, Republican candidates made very strong gains. So in 2016, Republicans combined for 297,000 or 39% of the vote in those districts, while in 2020, they combined for 431,000 or 45% of the vote in those majority Hispanic districts. In Florida, President Trump increased his Hispanic support from 35% in 2016 to 47%. Now, you really have three different Hispanic groups in Florida. So it's a little bit different than Texas. You have Cubans, you have Venezuelans, and you have Mexicans. And Trump overwhelmingly won the Cuban and Venezuelan vote and came close with the Mexican vote. In Nevada, Hispanic support for President Trump increased from 37 points to 6 points higher than 2016 and 15 points higher than 2008. The chart on the right just shows those national numbers. And as I said, President Trump did better than anybody since George W. Bush did in 2004. So really, there were two national elections in one. In one, voters elected Joe Biden as president-elect. In the other, though, voters repudiated the far left, the defund the police, the Green New Deal, the Black Lives Matter movement, and endorsed Republican policies by giving Republicans more seats in the House and likely eventually giving more seats in the Senate. There's polling out this morning showing both Loeffler and Perdue leading in Georgia, and I think they maintain those leads. So the map on the right is interesting. Hopefully you guys can see it on your screens. The orange areas are areas that Trump overperformed. The blue areas are GOP overperformance. And so in other words, the Senate leads across those areas by 2%, while Trump led by 1.5. Additionally, the current presidential margin is D2.9, but the House margin, if you take out the uncontested races, Republican and Democrat, is Republican +2. So House Republicans overperformed by 3%, a very significant number, which because Democrats expected to pick up seats in the House and Senate, and they did not. So as of today, we can also see on the right, rural and suburban counties divided clearly. And President Trump overperformed in the rural areas, but Senate Republicans vastly overperformed President Trump in the suburban areas. And that's why I feel confident that, as I talked earlier about Fulton County and Atlanta in general, in Georgia, where President Trump underperformed where he had been 4 years ago, I think Perdue and Loeffler are able to make those areas up. And then the suburbs. Really, this is a swing that we saw happen in 2018, and it continued. And really, Georgia 7, the 7th congressional district, is the only Republican seat right now that Republicans lost. It was an open seat, so it's not like an incumbent lost there. But the challenge that exists there, and I'll talk about this probably more in Q&A, is a big deal. We've seen a shift of 70,000 votes in that one district in 4 years. And we've seen similar challenges with Milwaukee, which is represented here on the right. I mean, gone are the days when President Bush was able to count on these areas. And had President Trump gotten even half as close as President Bush did in 2004, he would have won Wisconsin overwhelmingly. Those Milwaukee suburbs have really dissipated for us in terms of support, and it's why we lost the governorship there 2 years ago. So in the Senate, the majority in the Senate is going to come down to one state, as I'm sure everybody's well aware by now. And I actually was going to try and update my presentation with these surveys that came out. But David Perdue led Jon Ossoff 49-47 last Tuesday. Well, they're still counting, but that's where he leads as of the last, whenever I updated these slides. As I mentioned, a poll was out this morning that has him up 49-48. That's about as close as you can get. Then Kelly Loeffler actually trailed Ralph Warnock in her race 25-32, but you had another Republican member of Congress who was in that race. She leads by a larger margin this morning. I think it was 4 points. But if you look at Warnock won 68% of all Democrats who voted. Loeffler won 52% of all Republicans. So if you combine them together, it's almost the exact same outcome as the Perdue-Ossoff race. So what that means is getting down to election day is who's going to be able to turn out their vote. And with some of the things that you already see the Biden incoming administration announcing, I feel very good about our chances there. And I am involved in those and think they'll do well. Now in the House, as of right now, 24 races are yet to be called. Republicans made significant gains in South Florida because of those Hispanic changes I mentioned. They picked up CD 26 and CD 27, which is Donna Shalala. If you remember her, she went down and ran the University of Miami, screwed up the football team. They just ran her out, so she ran for Congress, and she only spent 1 term there. Republicans also toppled first-term challengers, as I'm sure everybody's aware, in Oklahoma 5, which, as Drew mentioned, I was involved in, South Carolina 1, which I was also involved in, New Mexico 2, which I was involved in. So those were all fun races. Happy to discuss any of those in Q&A. I'll talk a little bit more about CD5. Democrats are likely to maintain their majority, but they consistently fail to flip seats. And Democrats could still potentially lose seats in New York, Michigan, and California. And in fact, last night, one of the races in California was called, and I think we'll pick up 2 more there, we being Republicans. So that 17-seat advantage for Democrats is going to sink to at least 7, and it could go lower than that. I can tell you I was on a call with Leader McCarthy not too long ago where he believes there is a chance to get some party switchers as well. So this thing is not over in the House, and that could be really interesting, particularly if Republicans pick up both seats. The untold story of last Tuesday, though, is the state legislators. Republicans defended their majority in every single legislative seat, every legislature in the country, and they flipped the House and Senate in New Hampshire, and they flipped the Alaska House. Those are big deals because that was not expected at all. Republicans now control 62 of 99 state legislative chambers, the most in U.S. history. They have total control in 32 chambers, 4,170 seats as of this morning, and Democrats only control 13. Now, why that matters so much, and as you guys know, in Oklahoma, they increased their margins, their majorities. But the Republicans are now in control of redistricting in 33 states. That's what the maps on the bottom show, is where they will be drawing the maps, which means the Republicans will control redistricting and really the congressional seats going into 2030. So media polling versus campaign polling has been a very big subject of debate. And after 2016, the narrative was that the media polls were wrong on a state-by-state basis. The problem really was the media pollsters saw there was an overrepresentation of college graduates. But the reality was really not that simple. I think the challenge of media polling is twofold. It's kind of 2 crimes, a crime of commission, a crime of omission. The omission part is that media pollsters are drawing a sample frame based on preconceived notions, and then they'll do cheap methods of data collection. The commission part is whenever media pollsters set a perceived turnout margin, and just because they believe more Democrats will vote than Republicans, they adhere to that, they weigh to that, and they make polls reflect that. And that's really the more nefarious aspect that I think has to be dealt with. And I'll use my Wisconsin example again. I was doing work in Wisconsin. At no point did Joe Biden lead by 17 points. I also show the Iowa polls and the Nevada polls, where media polls consistently showed Democrats leading both of those states. Maine, where Susan Collins never led in any poll that ever came out. I mean, these are real problems because they do have the effect of depressing turnout. I can tell you I worked for Ernest Istook in 2006, and no poll ever had him up. And I don't know, I'm sure his family turned out to vote at that point. They thought he was going to lose so bad. So it's really a problem. And this chart is interesting if you can see my mouse on it. Hopefully you can. But if you look at the dots, the red dots are Republican underperformance in the polls that were released in Election Day. The House on the left, the Senate on the right. What that reflects is there are only 2 places. I'm sorry, the president on the left, the Senate on the right. There are only 2 places in which the Democrats were overrepresented in their sampling, and everywhere else Republicans were underrepresented in the sampling. That is a problem of catastrophic proportions. And one of the things that I take pride in is we were involved in a lot of successful races, but that I have less to do with that than I do about telling my client whether they're going to win or lose. And in campaign polling, if you tell your client they're going to win and they lose, they figure you were wrong and they fire you and they never hire you again. And it's there's not many people. It's like there's no atheists in foxholes. There's no bad pollsters working in campaigns. There's a lot of polling firms that were around when I started in this industry that aren't around anymore because they kept getting it wrong. Media pollsters seem to be able to survive that. And I'll end with Oklahoma 5. As I think everybody knows, after the primary, Stephanie Bice was trailing by about 5 points. Kendra Horn was releasing surveys then. We got a survey back to show the same thing. And I emailed Stephanie and said, this is great news. And she called me up and she goes, why is this great news? You were in my day when you sent me these numbers. I said, the reason this is great news is because Kendra Horn has had nothing but positive press and positive media for the last 5 or 6 months. She spent $1.5 million saying good things about herself, and you just got the crap beat out of you by Terry Neese and the Club for Growth. And so we're at our lowest point, and she's at her highest point. We're going to close. So I'll show you the way that we did that. And it's a different way of running campaigns, and I take a lot of pride in it. I know this is probably impossible for you guys to see, but on the right here is a heat map that shows every single voter in Oklahoma 5. In the right-hand side where it says base, those are the people we knew were going to vote for us, no matter what. there were 109,882 people in that universe. On the left-hand side was Kinder Horn's base, D base, or 101,665 of those. So this campaign was going to be decided between those in the middle, labeled persuasion, and those on the right, labeled get out the vote, GOTV. And every single dime we spent, even though we were outspent fairly substantially, by both Terry Neese and by Kinder Horn, we concentrated only on those two universes. And I know Stephanie would hear from people all the time, well, I don't see any of your ads, or I don't get any of your mail, or I don't get any of your digital ads. The reason was because you were in her base universe. You only saw her information if you were in the persuasion or the get out the vote universe. That's why when people come up and said, hey, I keep seeing all Stephanie Bice's ads, and you're either a swing voter or you don't vote very often. So that's why you're seeing. I'm glad to know you're getting them. But that was who we ran our campaign to. And we knew on election night we had to receive 55% of the overall cast vote to be successful. And we knew how many people had voted before that, and we got 59.8% because we targeted those 118,127 people that voted for us incessantly. They were going to vote for us, so they're going to take out a restraining order against us by the time election day got there. And so it was going into it, there was still a little bit up for grabs, but we felt very good about where things were. So I'll end with this, 4 questions I think the Republican Party has moving forward. Does rural turnout stay as high as it was in 2020, or was that a Trump-only effect? And the analogy to that is the African-American vote. It was at an all-time high in 2008 for Obama, and then exceeded that all-time high in 2012. But it didn't come out in 16 for Clinton, and it doesn't look like it turned out in 20 for Biden either. Our Republicans are able to continue to motivate and turn out that rural vote at the same level they did in 2020. Is the Hispanics shift permanent? Did the Republicans win more of them over, or the Democrats lose them by embracing the Black Lives Matters and other far left socialist policies? The suburbs seem to be getting more and more difficult. Can Republicans bring them back into the fold in 2022? I believe the answer to that is yes. I can talk more about that, but that's a question that's got to be answered. And then the solutions to media polling. This is one that I think is a real problem for not just the polling industry, which obviously I'm a part of, but for America, because the depressing effect of showing Donald Trump down 17 points in Wisconsin cannot be underestimated. And those same problems existed in other states where he lost closely. And so with that, Brooke, I will shut up and see if there's questions you want me to respond to.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was really great information. And what I'd like to do is I would like to take us to the headline story on ballot irregularities. And I need a professional's take on that. And have you seen major irregularities that fall outside the statistical norms that you were seeing as you were watching these races all along?
Outside the statistical norms is really a challenging question to answer because there are so many ways you can look at it statistically. I believe there are irregularities on both sides. There's no question about that. Are those irregularities more than the margin of difference in any state? And that's really the question, isn't it? And to this point, I thought it might be in Arizona and Nevada, but those margins have exceeded what would be a statistical difference. And I think I'll defer to Scott Walker, who's had a lot to say about this in Wisconsin, who, he went through a recount, he went through a recall, and then a recount on the recall. And it was the votes in a recount only changed by, at best, a few thousand, and usually only a few hundred. And I think that's going to be the challenge of these recount situations. Were there irregularities? Yes, there were. And I think it is. I also saw Jeb Bush make some comments about this, that, we had irregularities in 2000 and we had problems with counting the vote and we fixed it. And now, by midnight, who won or lost Florida. And states like Pennsylvania and Georgia and Nevada and Wisconsin and Michigan really have to implement those same changes. Why is it in Texas, where it's bigger than any of the states I just named, 16.5 million registered voters, multiple media markets, 254 counties that all have to report individually? We knew who won Texas by the end of the night. They can do it. Every other one else can too, and that's got to be fixed. But I have not seen anything so far that points to enough of a change that will change the outcome of the election.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have some questions on the chat line. Did the pollsters' poor performance influence or suppress Republican turnout or empower Democrats to jump on the bandwagon? How do you read that?
I hope I addressed that to some extent in my comments. I think, to me, if I'm Susan Collins, I'm really pissed off right now. Excuse my language, because it was, for her to be down in every single poll, I mean, not a single public poll had her leading, yet she won on election night by far outside the margin of error. So if you're a Collins supporter, did that depress your vote? I don't think there's any question it did. It probably had an impact on the president's vote there. In Wisconsin, again, showing him down 17. That was, for anybody who doesn't know the poll I'm talking about, that was the ABC News Washington Post poll. It's supposed to be the gold standard of media polling. It could not have been more wrong. President Trump was not down 17 points. What happened there is what I addressed when I said the media polling. They set a perspective of what the turnout would look like, which would be urban areas turn out at a greater level and rural areas coming back down. And look, this was done in 2012 too. Remember the whole unskew the poll movement, where the attitude was, and it was Republicans that got it wrong in 2012 because they did not believe that African-American turnout would match where it was in 2008. Well, that's what the media pollsters did. If I give them the benefit of the doubt, they did not believe rural turnout in Wisconsin would be where it was in 2016, and they believed urban turnout would exceed where it was in 2016. They were wrong on both counts. And because of that, it created that level. So did it depress Republican turnout? There's no quantifiable way to prove that, unfortunately. But look, I don't think there's anybody who would question whether or not it was the case. And I had a long conversation with the lead political reporter from Politico last Thursday night about this. And there's going to be, I do think it was a sea change in terms of the way polling is done on the media, at the media side, and the way it will be reported on the media side. But there's nothing we can do about 2020 with it, though.
Okay. A couple more questions. One, Biden attempted to change his position on fracking, saying late that he wasn't for a ban. How did this end up hurting or helping him in energy states?
What it did is it made it a non-issue, and it's unfortunate. I think this is another example of the media putting their finger on the scale. Because what happened is the next day, the fact checkers came out and said, oh, well, he's not against for banning fracking. And then the president put out a video showing that he had said multiple times during the campaign he was for banning fracking. And then the media again said, well, he did say that then, but he's changed his mind. And I think it certainly had an impact in states like Texas, Oklahoma. I thought it ultimately would have an impact in Colorado and New Mexico. I think it did. I think it's one of the reasons why a Republican took back the New Mexico 2 seat. But I think the media were able to really cloud the issue enough. And what that story should have been is probably less about fracking and more about the fact that Biden was lying and changing and flip-flopping on issues. And it wasn't. It became a story about President Trump changing his position on issues.
Okay, thank you. It clearly had an impact in those rural Pennsylvania counties as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Quick question regarding again on irregularities. Systemic issue is the only way this gets overturned. Computer software problems and ballot harvesting would flip the election and simply widespread mail-in ballot fraud. Do you agree? This is another question about, are there improvements to be made in the system within several of these states?
Yeah, it's kind of like a hindsight's 2020 type of position. I think what will happen is in the states that use the software that had glitches, they're going to be required to go back and recount those or re-examine those counties. But I can tell you, there's not a lot of optimism that it ultimately overturns anything. But it will be. I think it does change the way things are done in the future.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about lessons learned from this. I observed that it's Trump's party, whether he is in the White House or not, it seems. So how do you think about GOP voter energy going forward into the next cycle?
Yeah, it's really a story that is yet to be told, isn't it? I think you're going to have probably as soon as President Trump concedes and it's recognized that Biden is going to be the next president by everybody. Whether that is when the electors vote, or whether it's whenever Biden is sworn in, or if something does change and I'm wrong about that, and vice versa. But at that point, you're going to have a lot of people start positioning for 2024. It was kind of written about that Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz was thrown in the category too, although I can tell you it wasn't true. He campaigned in 16 different states for Senate candidates, but that they were campaigning in Iowa. Everybody went in the campaign for Joni Ernst. And so as people begin to position, I think it'll be a little bit of people will be very closely monitoring what President Trump has to say about that. And is he serious about running again in 2024? He's alluded to that and said that he has had people encourage him to look at doing so. or is he just going to sit back and play kingmaker and try and endorse someone who will carry on the MAGA agenda, to quote Sebastian Gorka. So I don't know is the answer to right now. I think that'll play itself out over the course of the next few weeks and months.
Okay. Another question from the chat line: were things like for and against masks, lockdowns, vaccines part of the polling and data gathering process, and were they correlative to voting preference? And will those things dominate a state like Georgia now that Biden advisors talking about a national lockdown and mask mandate?
Yeah, Chad, that's a great question. And you only had one state where this was on the ballot from a governor's perspective, and it was North Carolina. Now, you could say it was in New Hampshire too, I guess. But North Carolina, I really thought, I was surprised that the governor there was reelected by as much as he was, because he's implemented a mask mandate. It has been on lockdown. You know, the Republican National Convention was supposed to have been there, and it didn't happen, which cost the city of Charlotte millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars. And but you know, there's a lot of reasons why that happened. I think 2022 will be when we see that. Does a Steve Sisolak in Nevada get challenged because of that? I mean, what happens in Texas where they've got a statewide mask mandate? Does that become a primary issue potentially? And I say that with the full disclosure, I work for Governor Abbott. But there are Republicans down there who are upset about that. So I think, did it impact voting? There's no question that this is probably the first time in history where Republicans have been going to court to keep the polls open later because the lines on election day were so long. And it certainly did in some manner. I think it probably had something to do with seniors voting at a little bit lesser level than they had in the past, and President Trump losing them by 1 point. The vaccination, I know there's been a lot of thoughts and discussion about the fact that Pfizer only announced this week that they had the 90% success ratio with the vaccine, and not a week before. And we can all read into that what I read into it, or whichever you think. But I think we will not know the full impact until 22. But you're right that we absolutely have a case study on it in 21 on January 6th with those two Senate runoffs. Now that Biden is saying that he's going to have a national mask mandate. And it was interesting. I know Governor Stitt in Oklahoma was asked about it on Tuesday when he did a press conference. And he said, look, I believe in the 10th Amendment. I think you're going to have a lot of states, a lot of Democratic governors who are going to start remembering the 10th Amendment exists in the Bill of Rights and paying a little more attention to it than they did in the past as Biden begins to hand down his mandates.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Chris. Are there any other questions that people should be asking that we haven't asked today? Things that are really on top of your mind and on your colleagues' minds?
Well, I think the one thing that probably all my colleagues want to point out is the political polling was actually really good. I would say from an overall standpoint, Republicans did far better than I would have expected on down ballot races. And I think I felt like I knew we were going to win where we won, and I thought we were going to lose where we lost. But I don't do much at the legislative level, and so I didn't expect that level of support for Republicans. And what that says to me is the Democrats have moved so far left with their policies, and the fact that they have handed their party over from a messaging standpoint to the AOCs of the world. They're in a real challenging position right now. And there is a Republican congresswoman from Virginia who was on a conference call that reporters happened to be on earlier this week, where she started crying. And she's like, this is ridiculous. We got to stop with this messaging. You're going to get us killed in 2 years if we don't stop with the defund the police and the BLM and the Green New Deal. And Nancy Pelosi just said, well, I respectfully disagree. And that's where the conversation ended. So I think you're going to see Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez be major issues in this Georgia runoff. And if they end the way I expect them to, which will be with pretty solid Republican wins, you're going to see a lot of rethinking on the Democratic Party that is already occurring to some extent, because the head of the DCCC, the Democrat campaign commit arm, has already stepped down. It was already changing on the Senate level, but Masto, who runs it, has got to go back to Nevada and run for Senate. What's interesting about that is she's now talking about maybe not running for Senate and challenging primarying Steve Sisolak, the governor. So the internecine warfare that's going on within the Democratic Party right now is usually what happens to a party after they lose a presidential campaign, not after they win one. And so I think there's a lot of I don't mean to be doing victory laps, because certainly we lost as Republicans. But having said that, I think we got a lot more right than we got wrong. And, it's unfortunate that it didn't work its way up to the top of the ballot. I have some strategic reasons that I believe as to why that happened, because I think ultimately, if you look at what happened on Election Day with President Trump and those who decided in October, that's far more reflective of where the country is than what happened prior to October in terms of the voting.
That's an excellent point, Chris. Well, listen, thank you very much for your time today, Chris. Your presentation was exceptional, as always. And folks, if you want a winning technologist and strategist, Chris Wilson's your guy. Thank you, Chris, for coming back to Oklahoma and doing what you do. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thanks a bunch, guys. All right, we're going to transition here.
And you're good. Good morning. My name is Bruce Hine. I'm with Magellan Midstream Partners based in Tulsa.
Good morning. My name is Bruce Hine. I'm with Magellan.
First, thanks to Brooke Simmons for the opportunity to speak to you this morning and give you a minute about Magellan and our membership within the Petroleum Alliance. Magellan is based here in Tulsa. We have approximately 750 employees here, and we have assets throughout Oklahoma. In the refined products pipeline business, we have petroleum distribution and storage terminals in Oklahoma City and here in Tulsa, and also Enid. Around 40% of the state's gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel flows through our pipeline system and is distributed throughout the state. We also have a big presence in the crude oil business here in Oklahoma. In Cushing, we have around 13 million barrels of storage there. So whether it's crude or refined petroleum products, we have a large presence in the state. In addition, we are advocates for our industry, both on the crude and the refined product side. We feel that we do a lot of good things for our state and our communities that we operate in, and there's no better advocate for that than the Petroleum Alliance. So it's a privilege for us to have the opportunity to be an advocate on our own as a company, but having a coalition is generally always stronger and better. And we're a member of the Alliance for that purpose, to be a member of a coalition, all pulling in the right direction, pulling in the same direction. So whether it's legislation or whether it's rulemaking, we typically are on the same page as many others in our industry, working in the same direction. So this year, we're hopeful for legislation that will enhance our pipeline safety laws here in Oklahoma. We've been successful as an industry in working on pipeline safety over the last several years. We're also hopeful that there'll be legislation passed to provide a fair and equitable assessment for electric vehicles, which currently pay no tax to use our roads and bridges. So we're hopeful that the Alliance and other stakeholders will work together to resolve that matter in this legislative session. So in summary, thanks to Brooke, thanks to those in the staff at the Petroleum Alliance for working on behalf of our industry, and we look forward to a bright future.
All right, we're back, guys. Thanks very much. I'm really excited about this next segment. Ann and John, you can bring up your cameras now and your mics.
Okay.
There's John. John warned me ahead of time that he had not had a chance to cut his hair since COVID. So all that does is really reinforce my opinion that he's just a long-haired hippie from Midland, Texas. And I look forward to our visit with him. Ann, we're waiting for you to come up. But while we're waiting for Ann to come up, I'm going to go ahead and read the intros for both of these guys. These are really two solid performers who both work for the industry. First, John Northington is principal of the Northington Strategy Group and a volunteer advisor. He doesn't want the blame, and he cannot take the credit on the Biden campaign. But the Hill newspaper has twice named John as one of the top 10 energy consultants in Washington. He was White House liaison for the Department of Energy in '93, chief of staff for the Office of Fossil Energy, and senior advisor for oil and natural gas policy. John was also senior advisor to the director of the Bureau of Land Management at the Department of the Interior. Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Land and Mineral Management with energy policy responsibilities for the former MMS. He served on the Secretary of Energy's National Petroleum Council, along with several of our CEOs from 2002 to 2020. And during the 2004 presidential campaign, the National Journal mentioned John as a possible nominee for the position of Secretary of Energy, and he's been getting free lunches off of that since it was ever reported. John has represented several of our members on specific agency issues, and he may very well be busy for some of them in 2021 and beyond. Welcome, John. Ann Bradbury.
Can you hear me?
Got an audio issue, though.
Okay, hang on.
Might unplug and just see if you can use your computer mic instead of the earphones.
Can you see me?
Yeah. Muted, and I can see you. I can see you. I cannot hear you. Your microphone control is right at the top. So while she's doing that, Ann Bradbury is CEO of the American Exploration and Production Council, which represents more than 24 of America's premier independent natural gas and oil producers, several of them Petroleum Alliance members as well. AXPC brought Ann on board in 2019. Before that, she was a partner in a first-class DC lobby shop and served as a top leadership aide for over a decade to some of the most important leaders in Congress. I believe she served back-to-back House speakers. Isn't that right, Ann?
Correct.
And was one of the top legislative strategists and technicians in Congress. She was instrumental in the implementation and adoption of major rules packages and legislative initiatives ranging from the reforms on national security and intelligence policy to healthcare, energy, transportation, trade, education, energy policy initiatives, and that were all passed by the House of Representatives. So welcome, Ann. John, let's start with you. John, you and I were chatting during the final weeks of the campaign. Candidate Biden didn't really leave you with a lot to work on with regard to energy policy from the oil and gas standpoint. We've talked about that a little bit privately, and I know you were trying to do what you could, but let me just run through a few of the things that candidate Biden promised. And then I want to know, is this Obama 2.0 or is it something really, really different? So these are the pledges, and these come right out of the campaign documents. More transfers of tax dollars to wind, solar, and battery industries, reverse Trump executive orders and memoranda on oil and gas. As soon as the current tax treatment sunsets, in percentage depletion, the expensing of ordinary and necessary oil business expenses, IDCs, last in, first out accounting, and master limited partnerships as soon as possible. Aggressive methane limits for new and existing oil and gas operations, Quad OA. Required disclosure of operational, supply chain, climate risks, and GHG emissions. Take 30% of federal lands and waters off limits, ban new oil and gas permitting on federal lands and waters, raise royalty rates, create carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035, electrification of the ground-based transportation sector, unionize oil and gas workers to plug orphan wells nationwide, claw back executive pay for companies that abandon wells, a new environmental and climate justice division at DOJ, a 100% clean energy economy, net zero emissions by 2050, full integration of climate change into foreign policy, national security strategies, and rejoining the Paris Climate Accord on day one. That's a lot there. Right. So, John, I ask you, how should the oil and gas industry be thinking and planning based upon what you are seeing and witnessing there? How do we need to think about this? Obama 2.0 or Obama 2.0 on steroids?
Thanks, Brooke, for having me. And again, I'm here in my own capacity, but I would say Obama 2.0 on steroids. That being said, if all the tax information you talked about, that's probably gone by the wayside, because I think that was a lot of when people thought that the Democrats would take the Senate as well and gain seats in the House. I do think from the executive branch perspective, they are have been looking at all the presidential orders, the secretarial orders in different agencies, even within certain bureaus. They're looking at all the orders that have gone out. There will be a lot going on. I think the emphasis is going to be on methane. They will rejoin the Paris Accord. They will work toward I would say rolling forward instead of backward the methane rules at EPA and at Interior. And it sounds trite, but the campaign logo or theme was Build Back Better. So first, I think they need to build back to where we were in 2016, and then it is going to be attempted to go further than that. I think with like Interior, they're going to do a complete review of the oil and gas and coal leasing program all the way from cradle to grave, looking at lease forms all the way to decommissioning and plugging and abandoning responsibilities.
Okay. Back office team, I think we're having a little bit of audio difficulties. I don't know if you can troubleshoot that or not, but I'm picking it up on my end. If it can be addressed, please do so. Ann, let me toss it to you if we can. And can we talk a little bit about how you see the world? John mentioned a bit of that right there. Ann? Have we lost Ann?
It's a little frozen.
Yes, Ann is indeed frozen, it looks like to me. Although I can, trust me, she is not a cold person, generally speaking. So, John, let's continue with you a little bit. Okay, so
Okay.
I look at some of the transition team or the landing team, and I see we talked about Obama 2.0 on steroids, right? And there are a lot of folks on this list who have really just made their life's work about ending fossil fuels and hydrocarbons. And so as we think about the day-to-day issues or the working issues that some of our members are going to have, if they're on federal lands, et cetera, how do you propose that they sort of approach that? They've made significant investments, billions of dollars. How do we need to think about that as an industry?
Well, I think given frankly, what you and Ann do is going to be very important from a trade association perspective to get the message out. I do think from a company perspective, they do need to engage. If for no other reason, you need to get your message to the policymakers. If you don't go, then you know what the answer is going to be. That being said, there will be a much more progressive agenda than even what President Obama's was for energy and climate and things like that. It is an uphill climb, no doubt. When you just kept listing things that were on the campaign's platform. It is now time. The campaign's over. The transition has begun. The president-elect will be sworn in on January 20th. And as y'all know, governing is a lot different than campaigning. You do have, there will be aggressive moves to undo what the Trump team has done, for sure at Interior and EPA and elsewhere. But they will do it. I think EPA is even more interesting one. They had a big exodus of career professionals have left EPA, which will make their job a lot tougher in trying to undo a lot of the work that EPA has done under Andrew Wheeler, just because they don't have the personnel to actually do it. They'll have plenty of politicals, but they're not going to have the career folks that they need to begin with. It also goes for BLM. The Trump folks decided to move the headquarters of BLM to Grand Junction, Colorado. They had hardly any of the career people want to move to Grand Junction. It's not an indictment on Grand Junction. I don't know, but they're having a tough time. So they're going to be shorthanded, which I suppose would give your members some comfort, I suppose. But it's going to be all out. You're going to have to, come ready to fight. because the Biden administration is definitely going to be very aggressive in working toward regaining what was there when they left, when the Obama administration left, and then some. It's just like, for every action there's a reaction, and I think what the Trump administration did was a reaction to what the Obama administration did, and the pendulum's gonna go back the other way, just a little bit, but further.
Okay. Well, I think that we would both agree that it's probably unhealthy as a nation if we are bipolar on energy policy.
Yeah.
And I know, John, you have leaned in on behalf of some of the projects that our members have been working on in the past. You and I are familiar with an 8-year effort to get a final EIS across the finish line during the Obama administration for an established oil and gas field on federal land that had been producing for 52 years. And you remember that fight that we were in. I think only 3 or 4 EISs were finalized during the entire Obama administration. So that's sort of the thing that we're in for at this point. Is that how you see it?
I mean, there will be more of that. Yeah, there'll be efforts again to move forward, roll forward on some of the NEPA changes that the Trump administration made. It'll be interesting. I mean, there's no doubt you're going to have to work. Endangered Species Act is really going to be one of the larger issues that I know some of your members have to think about in Oklahoma and elsewhere in the Permian. I'm doing some work in the Permian right now on endangered species work. That's going to be critical. It is, I think, from an EIS for a project perspective, it will be a long process. It shouldn't take that long. It shouldn't have taken that long when we were working on our deal, Brooke. It actually started in the Bush administration and then carried over into the Obama administration. I can't tell you that it's going to get shorter. What I do know, and I will say this, that the folks that I know that will most likely be going into the agencies that would impact the industry, they are thoughtful, smart folks. They aren't the bomb throwers. That you can't be a bomb thrower when you're going to go in and govern. It just doesn't happen. So from that regard, I think it may not be much comfort, but the folks that go in are going to be serious, earnest folks. And will there be some demagoguery? Sure, there always is on both sides. But I think it's going to be tough, just to be honest. I mean, it is. I don't want to sugarcoat anything.
Okay.
It's a whole new day.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that honesty. And I think from the Alliance's standpoint, it's important for us to communicate the challenges that they're going to face so that they can plan appropriately for that. And I know that there's going to be a lot of work between, now and whenever, just to make certain that a lot of the investments that our members have made can bear fruit. So thank you very much for that take on that. When you've talked a little bit about some of the folks that are going in. And I think that we have Ann joining us by phone. Ann, is that you?
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what the technical difficulties is we're having, but I was able to call in.
Okay, thank you very much, Ann. Let me pitch it to you, and I'm still having a little bit of audio difficulties on my end. But if Ann, can you give us your take on what's sort of teed up now for the Biden administration and how that's going to play out?
Absolutely. So I think John, covered some of the, energy and environment and climate related issues that we're going to face early on. I would just add to that, I think climate is going to be an issue that permeates almost every part of a Biden administration agenda. So certainly, we're going to see, a regulatory onslaught from EPA and DOI, that would look like, Obama on steroids. But I also think, there are going to be a number of financial regulations that have a climate bent to them. I think some of the diplomacy will have a climate component. So I think climate is going to be really an issue that permeates a number of other sort of historically unrelated issues, FERC permitting decisions. And so I think that's something that the industry needs to be really thoughtful about and prepared for. I think, the other takeaway is that, as John noted, I think a lot of people going into this administration are going to be, somewhat pragmatic. Governing is different than campaigning. And the fact that it looks like the Republicans are holding the Senate, if that does indeed hold, I just can't really underscore enough how significant that's going to be in terms of personnel and personnel being policy. Because if that does hold, then Mitch McConnell will control the floor for nominations and would, likely serve as a moderating influence on some of the more senior cabinet officials that would be appointed. So I'll stop there, but those are a couple overarching thoughts that we're thinking about currently.
Okay, and so what I hear you saying is that the Georgia Senate races are probably pretty important if we want to make certain that we can curtail or moderate more radical ambitions, and also make certain that the United States, from an energy security and national security perspective, can sort of kind of continue walking that pathway.
That's exactly right, Brooke.
Okay. I got a question on the chat line, and this is for both. Do you think the Biden administration will try to reduce or eliminate crude oil and LNG exports? John?
Short answer, no. It came about during the Obama administration, particularly on the LNG side. To a lesser degree, the oil side will be used from a national security perspective. Obviously, Russia is a major player in putting gas into Europe. If we can be a offsetting force with that, we're going to continue to do that. Are there concerns from an environmental perspective? Sure. But I think in the long run, both will stay, long run, short term. I mean, they're going to stay in place. Will there be some move around the edges? Maybe. But I don't think that that's a thing that that the administration as a whole is really going to focus on, other than use that as a energy security and geopolitical security tool.
Okay. All right. And do you have any further thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I don't expect to see any sort of blanket policy in terms of a ban on exports of either LNG or crude. I do think it's possible that, again, just with permitting decisions going the way they're going, that there will be sort of a new climate lens put on exports that we need to be prepared for, specifically LNG, that may slow some of these decisions or approvals, but I wouldn't anticipate a ban, and I do think that a Biden administration understands the value from a national security perspective of energy exports.
Okay. Question coming from the chat line: what are the top 3 January 2021 actions that Biden will take? Talked about day. Pardon?
Day one, executive action.
Day one.
I think their top priority is COVID-19. A national I don't know about a national mandate, to be honest with you. I mean, it's not. You're not going to tell the states what to do. I mean, you can work with the states, and it looks like some of the states already, like Utah and Ohio, that are run by Republican governors, are moving to much stricter enforcement measures. I think with no doubt they will rejoin the World Health Organization, which I don't guess has formally been completed, but they will make sure that we stay in the World Health Organization. They'll rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. 3, probably announce an economic stimulus framework. It won't be necessarily an executive order, but I think they'll be clear about what they think is going to be needed. And again, it's not going to be as easy as some of us might have thought it would be before Election Day. But I do think, given the relationship between the president-elect and the majority leader in the Senate that goes way back, I think they'll be able to get some things done that have not been able to happen beforehand.
Let me ask a question about infrastructure.
Can I just add to that real quick? I actually think one that you're going to see really early on from the Biden administration in terms of energy-related executive action is related to environmental justice. I think this is a really big priority for them. They have an EJ executive order from the Obama administration, I believe, that I think will probably be dusted off. And I think that is going to be a priority that you see throughout the administration.
That's a good point, Ann. Yeah. If you look at the four priorities that are on the Biden transition website, it's COVID-19, economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. So Ann's on point.
Okay. What changes do you see in the federal oil and gas permitting processes?
Who do you want to go first? I don't care.
Ann?
You take that one.
Ann, no. Please, Ann, please.
Well, okay, I'll take a stab, and John can certainly correct me. So, I think first and foremost, and this kind of gets back to the January 21st question as well, there's at least one really high-profile infrastructure project that Biden has said that he would stop on day one, and that's Keystone. And I think how he does that is probably going to be fairly instructive. I mean, does he kill it forever, or does he sort of send it back to the drawing board with instructions to, do an enhanced DIS or, I'm not exactly sure the technical term. Does he provide a path for it or not? I think is something that will be instructive. I think that they're going to revisit all the NEPA reforms that this administration instituted. And I would certainly anticipate, more EISs that are required for all kinds of permitting decisions going forward.
Excellent point. I think if you're talking about strictly oil and gas permitting, which usually you're going to be talking about more on federal lands and perhaps Indian lands, I think they're going to put a pause on everything. I mean, I think there's a realization that, again, campaigns are campaigns, governing is governing. You can't ban federal oil and gas leasing. You can pause, you can halt it, you can do a thorough review top to bottom. But I do think there will be attempts at significant changes in the permitting process. Again, really starting back from the way they have to look at planning before they even do leasing. I think with leasing, there will probably be an effort to modify royalty rates onshore for sure. Maybe raise the minimum bids requirement per acre. It is important to know that for offshore, which is the Gulf of Mexico, that revenue that comes in is very important and very needed because they just, Congress just passed the huge outdoor act bill that will fund Land and Water Conservation Fund, and that money comes from offshore oil and gas revenue. So there's kind of a synergy there between folks that want to keep seeing the money go to the Land and Water Conservation Fund and folks that want to still see activity offshore. I don't think there'll be new areas. There weren't really in the Trump administration at the end. So I think we're still looking at the Western Central Gulf of Mexico.
Okay. I have a question that came in regarding the social cost of carbon versus social benefit of carbon to the Biden administration. what are you seeing or hearing, John, inside when we talk about moderating some of these positions? I think that my members firmly believe that there is a moral benefit to what they do, and I think that you saw that coming from Midland, Texas. You understand working in this industry, so what kind of dialogue is possible with the administration on that front? Much of anything?
Yeah, I bet dialogue is it's definitely possible. I do think there will be a emphasis on social cost, and that goes back to Ann bringing up environmental justice. I think that will guide a lot of the discussion that will come from the executive branch side.
Okay. Let me ask this question. Does technology resonate with policymakers, or does our industry rely too much on that topic to make the case for how the industry is addressing environmental concerns by policymakers? This is a good question for Ann and for John.
And you go first.
Sure. I absolutely think it resonates. I mean, I think that, for many, especially on the Democrat side, that's not necessarily enough. But I think most of the sort of moderate, rational Democrats I talk to very much understand that technology is really a critical component and that we're not going to be able to solve the larger climate issue without technology. So I think it's a really important issue for our industry to continue talking about.
I would agree, and see that Todd Eniga asked the question. Hey, Todd. I think technology is important. I mean, we've seen the advances in the industry and the improvements in efficiencies where, in the Permian, everything's down to almost a manufacturing process. Again, there'll be a lot of, if technology is going to address methane controls, that's definitely something there will be middle ground on, or common ground. Technology is going to still be is a strong case to make. Improvements in technology, strong case to make. It will be to this administration as well, and that it'll carry over into clean energy as well.
Okay.
Excuse me, renewable energy.
Thank you for that clarification, John.
Thank you.
Okay, we're running to the end of our segment here. I'd like to continue this conversation, but let me just ask each panelist, what are the 3 takeaways that you want us to remember as we go forward and think about how we need to plan for 2021? Ann, do you want to go first?
Sure. 3 takeaways. I would say number 1, and Chris spoke a little bit about this earlier, both parties are going through a bit of an identity crisis right now. Both the Republicans with what we're going to look like post-Trump, and the Democrats struggling with, the huge gap between the progressives and the moderates. And I think that that's an opportunity for us, and an opportunity that I think we should seize to find areas of alignment with certain parts of the Democrat Party that maybe we haven't, made a lot of inroads with in the past. Trump in particular made really, cut into the Democrat lead in terms of Hispanics. So I would certainly point to that as an area of opportunity for us. So I would say look for opportunities and not just risks. I would say number 2, one of the things that I think is lost a little bit in all of these projections is the emphasis that is going to be placed on enforcement, and the difference between what an enforcement agenda looks like under a sort of more aggressive Democrat administration than the Trump administration. On the campaign, even Biden himself was talking about, putting oil executives in jail or putting polluters in jail. Now that was during the primary, but I don't think that we can lose sight of the fact that enforcement is a really, really important tool that this administration has and will use. And finally, I think, another takeaway, I think beyond just that, climate is going to continue to permeate every issue, that, the big issues in this election were the economy and COVID, and those are going to improve, and over the next, year or 2, hopefully, and climate is going to continue to be a front and center issue. And so this industry really needs to continue to think about how we are going to position ourselves in a world in which climate is an increasingly important issue to voters.
John?
I think to add on the climate point and economic recovery, the president-elect, they've relied heavily on saying that creating new jobs in the renewable energy sector up and down the line can be a big job creator, generator. There is obviously a provision or in the platform or in Biden's platform about putting a lot of oil and gas workers back to work, plugging and abandoning wells and cleaning up abandoned mines. Methane regulation, I would agree with that. That's going to be really one of the top priorities. Again, what will balance all that off is that the agencies that do a lot of this have really lost a lot of talent, and it's going to be tougher than folks anticipated.
Okay. Well, great. Listen, guys, thank you very much. I have to cut it off there, but I want to tell you how much we appreciate both of you making time for us today. And I'm certain we'll continue this dialogue. John, thank you for dialing in. And next time, if you can make certain you get a haircut, maybe look a little bit more like mine, that'd be great. And thank you very much for all you do for our members every day on the Hill. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See ya.
I'm working on it. Sorry.
As the official IT provider of the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma, AmShot is happy to help our clients with email, information security, reporting, and automation by employing local help desk, hardware and software experts with decades of industry-specific experience. To say thank you to Oklahoma's top industry, we're offering a 15% discount for the first 6 months of IT services. Give us a call at 405-594-7645 or visit us at amshot.com/energy to schedule a free consultation.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here since we had a reverse of the videos. I'm going to go ahead and do the AmShot giveaway right now. So we are giving away a set of AirPods thanks to AmShot. And the proud sponsor is going to the winner. See, Kara Crittenbrink with Ventana Exploration and Production. So, Kara, please contact our team. Lauren or Natalie will make certain that you get your AirPods. I'll hold them actually in front of the screen. Yes, I am technology challenged. All right. With that,
hello, Petroleum Alliance members. Glad we could gather together virtually for this year's annual meeting. I'm Bill Berry, CEO of Continental Resources. It goes without saying that 2020 has dealt our industry its fair share of blows. From the inappropriate dumping of oil by the Saudis and the Russians, to the grueling coronavirus pandemic, to that dreaded day, April 20th, when oil went negative. But I don't want to dwell on the past. As an industry, we know when times are tough, we push forward. We are resilient. That is a trait of our industry, but it's also embedded in who we are as Oklahomans. Oklahoma needs oil and gas. America needs oil and gas. The world needs oil and gas. Together, we continue to provide more than 135,000 jobs to the people of Oklahoma. We continue to provide critical funding for our schools, and we generate a third of our state's total economic output. On a larger scale, we work day in and day out so that people all across our country have the fuel they need to warm their homes and to travel using affordable gasoline. And we can continue to export these clean burning fuels all over the world and bringing countries out of energy poverty. All this is to say oil and gas remains absolutely necessary to our state, our country, and our world, and will be for decades to come. I want to encourage you all that even through this tumultuous time, we are absolutely essential to life. You all have done an outstanding job of pressing forward, and I know we will get through this. Coming off an election cycle where oil and gas took center stage, it is more important than ever that we stand up for our industry. There will continue to be those that try to detract from the life-changing work we are doing each and every day. But we must fight to remain energy independent. Keep fighting the good fight, and all of us should be proud of the work we are doing to better the way of life for every Oklahoman and every American. I look forward to gathering again in person one day soon. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the 2020 annual meeting.
Thank you, Bill. Gosh, from Bill's mouth to God's ears, we certainly appreciate that uplifting message and support, the continued support that Continental shows us. Previous segment, John and Ann, thank you. It was wonderful. We didn't hear all the things we wanted to hear, of course, but it was great. I have the just the pleasure of introducing Alex Epstein. He's a super smart guy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about him. The funniest thing that happened is I apparently had mispronounced his last name for like 2 or 3 years, and he put it real bluntly to me, and it fits. It's Epstein like Einstein. He is that smart. You guys are going to enjoy hearing from him. He's got accolades, a giant list of accolades. Of course, he is the founder and director of the Center of Industrial Progress. It's a wonderful organization with great goals in mind. Author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, probably considered the most persuasive argument ever made for continuing the use of fossil fuels. Something that every one of us should read. He's a scholar from Duke. He's got, like I said, many accolades. What I like about him and can sum up is that he takes a common sense approach, as seen through the lens of compassion and empathy for just the human condition. And he's basically for human flourishing. And I'm very proud to have him on our show. And I'm turning it over to Alex. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, David. Can everyone hear me? Or at least can David hear me? Perfect. So okay, so I got billed as some sort of genius, and of course I'm worried that I'm going to have some sort of technical issue. But everyone, I think, can see the slides, and we're going to have a couple of videos in a second. So great. So thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. My focus today is going to be on moral clarity. We have, the previous speakers, I just caught the tail end, but it's really interesting just hearing about all the different kinds of challenges. What are the different kinds of opportunities? What kinds of strategies can be useful in navigating them? And I want to step back and just talk about what is right. I'm a lot of my work is I do a lot of communication, consulting myself. I think I've persuaded a lot of people on this issue. And I think it all starts with thinking about ourselves, what is right, and being really clear on that. And then once you're really clear on what you think is right, then it becomes a lot easier to persuade other people. And some people you can't persuade all the way. Some you can only persuade part of the way. But starting off with just what is true about the world. And my view of what is true about the world is the world needs more fossil fuels, not less, going forward. And I want to share sort of the journey that led me to that, and that led me to fight for fossil fuels, and that may lead you to as well. So if we, let me just try to load these videos. So just to give you an indication, if I'm going to tell you how to, I want to make sure we have this video, but if I'm going to tell you to really stand up and fight for this, I shouldn't be a hypocrite. So hopefully this works. Chelsea, could you play the first video, the protest one?
Hello.
Oh, sorry. So this is me at the largest anti-fossil fuel rally in history.
Do you hear what they're saying?
Hey, hey, ho, ho, fossil fuels have got to go. I have a very different opinion on the matter. Let's go see if we can engage. Can we just go stand in the middle?
It gives you like a good backstory.
Hey guys. Can we pause the video? All right, so that was a really interesting experience. By the way, if you want to see those videos, and I'm going to share a whole bunch of other resources, including my slides. Since you're not here, I can't collect your information that way. But if you just email me, alex@alexepstein.com, subject OK, that should be pretty easy to remember, alex@alexepstein.com, subject OK, then I'm going to send you a whole bunch of resources, including what happened at this protest, which is kind of a fun thing to watch. But when I'm at a place like this, I usually get this question, why are you doing this? Why are you saying the world should be using more fossil fuels? Nobody says that. And people often think that, oh, it must be because you were paid off by the industry or you grew up in an industry-friendly place. And I didn't even know anyone in the industry when I came up with my views, let alone had any financial connection. And I grew up in a place called Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is one of the most liberal places in the US. I learned nothing positive about fossil fuels. I have no family in the industry. And so my love of fossil fuels has nothing to do with those things. It actually has to do with my love of what's considered the world's most useless subject, which I decided to make a career out of, which is philosophy. When I was 20 years old, I was at Duke, and I told my computer science advisor, I was in computer science at the time, I want to be a philosopher. And he said, this is a terrible idea. Nobody has a problem in life and says, oh, let's call a philosopher for the solution. But my belief is that philosophy is actually the most practical subject because it focuses us on thinking methods. How do we think more logically and clearly about complex, confusing issues? And I think philosophy is one of the key things that we need to make progress in energy. Now, people disagree with this. So, for example, I was testifying in front of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. I'm from California now, so my Senator Barbara Boxer was there, and she challenged the idea that a philosopher was necessary, but then I explained to her why one was. Could we load that second video?
Mr. Epstein, are you a scientist?
No, philosopher.
You're a philosopher?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is the Environment and Public Works Committee. I think it's interesting we have a philosopher here talking about an issue.
It's to teach you how to think more clearly.
Well, you don't have to teach me how to think more clearly. You don't have to try running.
So that was a kind of a fun experience. And the point I want to make is I did not prepare that line. That's just what naturally came up to me because that's how I think about philosophy. Philosophy is really about how do we think more clearly. And a lot of what got me interested in fossil fuels is a certain idea in philosophy that seems like common sense, but I think is really violated when we talk about energy. And this is the idea that when evaluating any issue, we must look at the full context, which means we must carefully weigh the benefits and side effects of every option. So for example, if you have antibiotics, you have some infection, you're thinking about, do I take antibiotics? You look at the different options and you weigh the benefits and the side effects, including taking no antibiotics. And then you say, well, what's the best one? And that seems like common sense, and it is in a sense common sense. But I noticed with energy, we don't do this. With fossil fuels, we tend to only look at the side effects. And then the same is true with nuclear. We tend to only look for negative side effects. And then for solar and wind, we tend to only look at positive. So when I started learning about oil, I was really fascinated. Wow, there are some real benefits here that nothing else can really do. Like there's no other fuel that can fly planes around the world, and it has to do with oil's amazing energy density. And I noticed I never hear about those benefits, those, in the case of oil, unique benefits. I only hear about side effects. And so I didn't know what was true, but I knew that if we have this kind of bias where we're only looking at the benefits of some technologies and the side effects of others, we're not going to get to the right solution. So I became very interested in what is actually the truth about energy, the different forms of energy, if you look at the benefits and side effects in an even-handed way and in a precise way, carefully weighing them. And part of that is I'm really, the way I think of benefits and side effects from a philosophical perspective is I'm always thinking about the ultimate goal of human flourishing. What is going to be best for human life now and in the future? Flourishing means human life to its full potential. So every aspect of life going well. Now, human flourishing means it includes having a good environment. So a safe environment, a healthy environment. It means thinking short term and long term, but nevertheless, you're still thinking about human life. And what I noticed was a lot of the discussions about energy weren't very focused on human flourishing. For example, when we're talking about drilling in the Arctic, there's a focus on, oh, are we impacting the habits of the caribou? But there's no focus on, well, what about the benefits of the oil? And even with the caribou, it's like they like the oil rigs often. So it just seemed that the focus was, instead of human flourishing, it was this idea of an unimpacted planet. And my focus is, I don't believe in an unimpacted planet. I believe we should impact the planet when it's good for us, and then we should not impact the planet when it's good for us. So that also shaped my perspective. So I'm looking at the full context from a human flourishing perspective. And I think that when you do that, you conclude pretty quickly that the benefits of fossil fuel use going forward will far, far outweigh the side effects. I want to break this down. It's going to be a little bit quick. I'm going to have, as I said, a lot of resources to send you later, but I think these are the 3 key points to get moral clarity about the role of fossil fuels in the world going forward. So I'm going to summarize them and then just go right into a lot of the relevant facts. So number 1 is, for decades to come, fossil fuels will be by far the lowest cost source of reliable energy for billions of people. Number 2 is that reliable, low-cost energy is fundamental, and I'm emphasizing fundamental, to human flourishing, including a safe and healthy environment. And then number 3 is, continuing use of reliable, low-cost fossil fuel energy will cause some warming, but it will be extremely manageable, not catastrophic. So let's just jump right in to the first point, which is, for decades to come, fossil fuels will remain by far the lowest cost source of energy for billions of people. Now, this is something that we hear more and more is definitely not the case. We hear solar and wind are cheaper than fossil fuels. They're growing really rapidly. We're in the midst of a rapid energy transition. And I just want to share with you some facts that just refute this idea, or at least call it into very strong question. So number 1 is that fossil fuels are the energy of choice over 80% of the time, and they're also the world's fastest growing source of energy. Neither of these is widely recognized. So 80% means that's more than every other alternative combined times 4. And then fastest growing. So if you look at the 2019 data in terms of what sources added the most kilowatt hours of energy in absolute terms, fossil fuels are considerably more than solar and wind combined. So they're not only the largest by far, the dominant, they're still the fastest growing. And so then people think, oh, well, it must be because fossil fuels are old and the alternatives are new, which brings us to fact 2, which is that most of these alternatives are very old. So over the last 100+ years, entrepreneurs have tried to produce reliable, low-cost energy using many different fuels: the sun, the wind, water, waves, tides, geothermal heat, wood, crops, radioactive materials like uranium and thorium, and of course, oil, coal, and gas. And yet there's something about oil, coal, and gas that is making them so dominant. And so we really have to take this seriously if we're thinking about the future. And we cannot just assume that, oh, it's going to be easy to replace them. And the more we look at the history, the more we see that there have been claims for many decades that solar and wind are going to be better than fossil fuels any day now. This is Amory Lovins, one of the world's most prestigious energy thinkers now, but also in the 70s. And he said in 1976, recent research suggests that a largely or wholly solar economy can be constructed in the United States with straightforward, soft, that's his term for renewable, technologies that are now demonstrated and now economic or nearly economic. So this is in the 70s. People today are talking about, oh yeah, 2050, we're going to replace fossil fuels for energy, 2035 for electricity. This is somebody, 44 years ago saying, oh yeah, we're really close to solar being this great force. So there's just something about fossil fuels that is superior that we need to acknowledge if we're going to think seriously about energy going forward. Now, here's the key thing, I think, to understanding why fossil fuels dominate and then what's required for any alternative. When we think about energy, like solar and wind, we're often taught to think of it as, oh, just think about the fuel itself. So you think, oh, the sun is free, the wind is free, it must be free. So that solar and wind are inevitably going to be cheap. And yet in practice, they're not. They're only 3% of the world's energy. There's something going on. And that something going on is this idea that energy is a process. So when you think about energy, you cannot just think of one of the inputs like the sun and the wind and say, oh, that's great, that's free. You need to look at what's the total process. So the cost of energy is determined by the cost of the total process for producing it. All of these different factors, including mining and transportation and maintenance and disposal. And it's really hard to create low-cost processes for all of the energy needs of billions of people, because the energy needs to be reliable. And there are also all sorts of different machines that we need to use, particularly heavy-duty transportation machines, and then machines that involve industrial process heat. Those fossil fuels are especially dominant. So if we recognize that energy is a process, it's really hard to create a low-cost process. It starts to point to, okay, why are fossil fuels dominant? It also points to why are the so-called renewables so expensive. And so if you think about the whole process, the number one thing to think about with renewables is the unreliability. This is something that needs to be stressed over and over and over. So this is Germany. This is in the moral case for fossil fuels. These are data from 2013, but it's the same basic thing now, just these are a little bit higher. What you can see is at the bottom, you have solar, so that's black, and then you have wind in gray. So the combined total is the peak of the gray. And then at the top, you have the average electricity production. So what you can see is sometimes solar and wind generate a decent percentage of the electricity. Now, this is not industrial process heat. This is not liquid fuel for transportation. So even that, it's not a large percentage of energy overall. But even with electricity, okay, sometimes it's a decent percentage, but you see sometimes it goes near zero. Well, what does that mean? If you have a source of energy that sometimes is going to go near zero, that means you need a backup. And it means you need backup virtually 100% of the time. So when you're looking at the process of using solar and wind to produce energy, you can't just look at the sun and the wind, and you can't even just look at the solar panels and wind turbines, and you can't even just look at the solar panels and wind turbines and the massive transmission infrastructure that's usually ignored. You have to look at the cost of backup. And the cost of backup is basically all of the existing reliable power plants. So solar and wind are not really replacing costs on the grid. They're adding costs to the grid. And that's why in practice, the more solar and wind are used, the more electricity prices go up. So this is something that really needs to be understood and really needs to be publicized. When these prices are published about solar and wind, these are not prices that recognize the total process. They're what we could call partial cost accounting, and they are very, very dishonest. Just checking my timer here. Okay. So let's go forward. So in terms of what is it about fossil fuels that make them so good compared to solar and wind and compared to everything else? I think there are three natural attributes that fossil fuels have that are almost unique. There's one other source of energy that is comparable in certain ways, which I'll talk about in a second, but it's these unique properties and then generations of ingenuity and refinement harnessing the properties. And so the basic properties are natural storage. So unlike solar and wind, which are unreliable flows of energy, fossil fuels are given to us, so to speak, as stores of energy. So they're naturally stored. And so that helps a lot with reliability. We don't have to pay for all these backup costs, which are very expensive to build man-made backup like battery storage systems and whatnot. They're naturally concentrated, particularly oil. So they store a lot of energy in a small amount of space, which is good for mobility, but it's good. It's also good for being international. Like with coal, you can easily move it overseas, and natural gas with LNG, you can increasingly move it overseas and use it to produce anywhere. And then natural abundance. So there's just a ton of it. So those three qualities are very, very unusual. There's only one other technology that has those qualities, and that is nuclear. So nuclear is very exciting because nuclear is naturally concentrated, it's naturally stored, it's naturally abundant, but it's a lot more complex to harness. And unfortunately, we have really bad regulations that have virtually criminalized nuclear, such that the time it takes to build a plant has gone from 4 years to 14 years, and the costs have gone way up. But I do think that if we're talking about policy, the oil and gas industry, as a champion of energy, should be avidly in favor of decriminalizing nuclear. So nuclear shouldn't be seen as the enemy. They shouldn't be seen as somebody who needs to be subsidized, but they should be seen as, we support this, we support any form of competitive energy, and we want to decriminalize them and let them compete as well. And that gives us, I think, a huge moral high ground against everyone who claims to care about CO2 levels, given that most of them are either totally anti-nuclear or want to regulate it so much that it can't compete economically. So the other form of energy that's significant in the world that's good is hydro. And hydro is great, but it's limited by location. So you can only use so much hydroelectric energy in the world. So that's something to admire. It's something to allow. Some places should probably allow it more. But nevertheless, there is nothing in the world that is close to a scalable substitute for fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. So what that means is that if we want to continue our level of energy today and expand it around the world, then we need to use fossil fuels, and we actually need to use more fossil fuels. And so that raises the question, well, how important are fossil fuels? How valuable? People think often, well, yeah, fossil fuels are, yeah, energy is okay, but it's not that valuable. It's certainly not as valuable as a livable planet. And my view is you got that totally wrong. The only reason we have a livable planet is because we use lots and lots of energy. And so the way I put it here is reliable, low-cost energy is fundamental to human flourishing, including a safe and healthy environment. So I think the most important statistic to know about energy and human flourishing is what I call these hydrocarbons and human flourishing hockey sticks. And what these basically show is that the world is getting to be a better and better place to live. So you can think of it as it's a more livable place. The world has a larger population than ever, but instead of that meaning that we're running out of resources, we have higher income than ever. So each person has more resources and higher life expectancy. So we're in this amazing state of affairs where the world has never been a better place to live for the average person. The average person today lives better than most kings did throughout history. And I think that's amazing, and I want that to continue. And for that to continue, we need to understand what makes that possible. And I'm going to argue energy makes that possible in even more of a way than you may think working in the energy industry. Now, we see there's a correlation between these amazing improvements in human life and CO2 emissions. Now, I put it in terms of CO2 emissions because it's important to know that people, CO2 emissions have been rising already for 170 years, and it has not been anything resembling the end of the world. In fact, the world has gotten better. So this should make us suspicious of the idea that CO2 emissions are some catastrophic issue. I do believe they impact climate, but the idea that they're catastrophically impacting climate should be suspicious. But the real reason, of course, that CO2 emissions are going up along with these other things is not that CO2 emissions have been so good for life themselves, although they contribute to plant growth, which is important. It's because the energy that came with the CO2 emissions is so important. Now, this could all be a correlation and a coincidence, but I'm going to argue it is fundamental. So why do I argue it's fundamental? I think the easiest way to understand this is to ask first, not why is life so good now, but why was life so bad for so long? And how does that relate to energy? I think there are two basic reasons life was so bad for so long. One is the nature of the earth, and two is the nature of the human body. So in terms of the nature of the earth, we're taught a very wrong philosophical idea about the earth that totally distorts our thinking about energy, which I call the delicate nurturer assumption. And the delicate nurture assumption is the idea that the unimpacted planet is a delicate nurture. It exists in a delicate balance that is stable and sufficient and safe, so it takes care of us. But if we significantly impact it, we're going to destroy the delicate balance and it's going to stop nurturing us. So human beings on this view are parasite polluters. And this view informs the idea that human impact is bad, that it should be avoided. We shouldn't impact our environment. This whole thing is just total pseudoscience, and yet it's assumed everywhere. When we talk about the climate is treated like a delicate nurture, whereas in reality, the climate and nature are much better thought of as wild potential. So they have the potential to be human friendly, but in their wild, unimpacted state, they're dynamic, they're deficient, they're dangerous. And that's why life was so bad for so long. The earth was not a very livable place for the average person because nature is wild potential, not a delicate nurture. So what does that mean? That means that not only is impact not necessarily bad, impact is really good. And this is part of moral clarity. We need to recognize that significant impact, as long as it's value creating impact, productive impact, that is a good thing if you care about human life. So we shouldn't think, oh, our environmental impact is bad. No, the destructive environmental impacts, the anti-human ones, yeah, those are bad or you want to minimize them. But in general, human beings' impact on the world is good. It makes the earth a much better place to live. So human beings are producer improvers. So the nature of the earth is it's not a delicate nurture, it's wild potential. That means we need to engage in dramatic productive activity to impact it for the better. Now, I mentioned that's the issue with the earth. What's the issue with the human body? Well, the issue with the human body is the human body itself is not very well equipped for productive activity simply because we are so weak. We cannot deploy very much energy. We can't do very much physical work. So if it's just us and our bodies, if we're a manual labor society, then we cannot produce enough to overcome the wild potential planet. So how does energy fit in? Well, energy allows us to overcome this. So energy is machine food. And what energy allows us to do is to not just use human labor, but to use machine labor. And machine labor is amazing. Machine labor can do two things. It can dramatically amplify our abilities. So for example, on a farm, you can have a modern combine harvester can reap and thresh 700 times more wheat than the average human being. So think about it. The average human being, just one person with this machine becomes 700 times more productive. So that's unbelievable machine labor that allows that one person to reap more than enough wheat for 500,000 loaves of bread a day. So that's one thing machine labor does, is it amplifies our productive abilities. And the other thing it does is it expands them. So it allows us to do things that we could do with no amount of human labor, like fly a plane. There's no number of human beings that you could sort of get together and fly a plane. So this machine labor just dramatically amplifies and expands our productive abilities, and thus it makes the world a much more abundant place for us. But that all depends on machine food. Machine labor doesn't work without machine food. I sometimes call it machine calories. And so the more energy, the more machine calories we use, the more we can use machines to produce the values we need to survive and flourish. And I think that when we're looking at the world, we need to recognize that just about everything amazing about the world is because we use unbelievable amounts of machine labor. But that only works if we can produce the energy that powers the machine labor reliably and at low cost. And that is, of course, what your industry specializes in doing. So a couple aspects I want to stress here. The lower cost energy is, the lower cost everything is. Because if it's the food for the machine labor, yeah, the lower cost that is, the more you can use machines, the more you can produce, the cheaper, the less time things take, the cheaper it is, the cheaper they are. And then the higher cost energy is the higher cost everything is. Another aspect that's really important, and this helps explain why energy is fundamental, is the relationship between energy and time. The more machine labor we use, the less manual labor we have to do ourselves to meet our basic necessities like food and clothing and shelter. And when we're able to do that, then we free up the most valuable thing in the world, which is time. And part of what we can do with that time is we can spend that time thinking about how to do things better. So if you think about the medical field, progress in science and technology more broadly, all of that depends on massive amounts of human time freed up. But that time is only freed up by the machine labor that fossil fuels makes possible. So that if you look at if you want to think about progress in things like a COVID-19 vaccine, that kind of thing, that totally depends on reliable, low-cost energy. And of course, the research and the innovation all involves machine labor in the form of computers. That's also powered by reliable, low-cost energy. This is why I'm saying it's fundamental. It's at the root of everything. It's not the only cause, but it's at the root of every other thing. So I hope this gives you clarity that what you're doing is making just about everything good in our world possible. Last aspect I want to stress is the relationship between energy and the health and safety of our environment. So if you think about something like clean water, the way we are taught to think about clean water is energy is just bad for clean water. So sometimes energy pollutes clean water, and that's bad. And then if we have so-called clean energy, then it won't pollute the clean water. But what nobody talks about is how energy makes possible clean water. Nature does not give us, it's not a delicate nurture. It doesn't give us abundant, easy to access clean water. It gives us water that's often dirty and that's often distant. So what do? We use machine labor to purify the water and we use machine labor to pump the water from from where it is to where we need it to be. So when we think about environment, health and safety of our environment, keep in mind every day, day in, day out, machines are keeping us safe from the naturally dangerous and dirty environment. We can't believe this delicate nurture or dogma. We have to recognize that no, energy and machines are making our earth every day a cleaner place. And we have to think about that when we think about any of the side effects. The most dramatic thing, and I'm going to explain this, is the relationship between energy and climate, because people definitely think, oh, we're using fossil fuels, we're putting more CO2 in the atmosphere, that must be making climate more dangerous. And I thought that too before I started studying this, but what you see is the actual data show climate is getting way safer. So these are climate related deaths from storms and floods and heat and cold and wildfires that are all supposedly getting worse. And yet they've been declining. So the climate disaster death rate has declined by 98% since the 1920s over the last century. So you think about that. Climate is becoming far, far safer. Why is that? Well, the reason is because nature doesn't give us a safe climate that we make dangerous. It gives us a dangerous climate that we make safe. How do we make it safe? Well, we produce, using machine labor, again, all sorts of climate protection. So we produce sturdy homes, and we produce heat when it's cold, and we produce cool air when it's hot through heating and air conditioning systems. And we produce irrigation, and we produce different kinds of drought relief when places have big droughts. And we produce all these weather warning systems. All of these depend on abundant amounts of machine labor, which depend on reliable, low-cost energy, overwhelmingly from fossil fuels. And that's how fossil fuels make us safe from climate. And if we radically reduce the amount of energy in the world, then everyone is going to be in danger from climate. The natural climate was a far more dangerous place than any of us in the high energy world, what I call the empowered world, experience today. So let's summarize that our amazing standard of living, including our environmental quality, depends on reliable, low-cost energy on a scale we can only get from fossil fuels. Now, I've talked so far about the empowered world, those of us who have a lot of energy, but it's important to recognize that there are 3 billion people who lack reliable, low-cost energy. This means these are people who are living manual labor lives. They have to deal with the natural environment using manual labor, and that is a really low standard of living. If you look at electricity, just no electricity at all, that's 800 plus million people. If you look at just what people are using to heat and cook their homes, you have 2.7 billion people, many of the same people without electricity, who are relying on biomass for cooking and heating. So that's wood and animal dung, and that has all sorts of air pollution, but it's just a very low energy life. So we have this world today that is incredibly unempowered. And if we recognize energy is fundamental to human flourishing, a world with reliable, low-cost energy is a much more livable world than one without it, because that one has abundant machine labor and the other one just has manual labor. Then we recognize it's a moral imperative to produce a lot more energy. And remember, in the near future, we can only produce a lot more energy using fossil fuels. So continuing fossil fuel use is essential to billions of people having the reliable, low-cost energy they need to flourish. And I mean this very literally. Restricting fossil fuel use on any significant scale would be genocidal, because it's going to prevent billions of people from achieving anywhere near their potential. Now, it's in this context that we need to talk about climate, because I think of climate and climate impact, it's a side effect of fossil fuel use. So there's this question, okay, we need to look at it. We need to look at the side effects, but we need to recognize the benefit of fossil fuels is a far more livable world for billions of people. We have to recognize that's the starting point. So if you're considering, oh, how big are the side effects, you have to recognize the benefit, again, is a far more livable world for billions of people. And so in that context, we need to look at how significant are the side effects. And they have to be pretty damn significant to reduce energy use, because reducing energy use makes everything worse, including climate safety worse. So it's first, if we talk first about the other side effects of fossil fuels, like air pollution, water pollution, this is a graph of air pollution, we see that the other forms of side effects we can reduce cost effectively. So we can use more fossil fuels and have less air pollution, and that's really great. So there's nothing really to worry about there. Other countries can mimic us if they want to, but there's no real fundamental problem with conventional pollution. The real issue is climate, because with climate, what happens is when we emit CO2, we have no cost-effective way of capturing on a large scale. So CO2 does build up in the atmosphere. So we do have to think about that, but we have to think about it in a very precise way. And I think that when we do, we conclude that it will cause some warming, but it will be extremely manageable, not catastrophic, exactly like it's been so far. So this is just the kind of thing that comes up. This came up with Biden before he was elected. Like he said, climate change is the existential threat to humanity. Unchecked, it is going to actually bake this planet. This is not hyperbole. It's real, and we have a moral obligation. And so this, I had an interesting incident with LinkedIn over this, where they took my post off and then I corrected them. They actually restored it, which was nice. But the main point here is we're taught, oh yeah, it's going to bake the planet. It's going to be unlivable. We really have to look at things with a lot more precision than that. So I'm just going to share with you quickly 3 facts that changed my perspective. All of these are verifiable facts, not opinion or extreme speculation. And you can get the data behind these and the resources that I'm going to share. Just email alex@alexepstein.com. Subject okay. Okay, so fact 1 is that designated environmental experts, the same people today who are claiming the world is going to end often, have been predicting imminent climate doom for 30 plus years. So this is the President Obama's leading science advisor, John Holdren. He predicted in the mid-'80s that as many as 1 billion people would be killed by carbon dioxide climate-induced famines. So in fact, what we've seen is there are fewer climate-related deaths overall, and the world is better fed overall. So he was exactly 180 degrees wrong, to an extreme degree. Or we have the UN. The UN, particularly not the scientists, but the press people, tend to make these very existential statements. And so this guy in 1989 talks about a 10-year window of opportunity. Nations are going to be wiped off the map, climate refugees, all the things we hear today. It just has not happened at all. So we have to recognize there is this track record. The second thing, which I've already mentioned, is that we've had 170 years of rising CO2 levels, and yet we're safer from climate than ever. So I showed you this data. The key thing to grasp is that in terms of, and just to give you the latest data, 6,646 people died of climate-related causes in 2018. It's hard to think of any number globally that's smaller than that for deaths from some cause. So it's really actually a minor cause of death today. It used to kill millions of people a year, like in the 30s. But because we're so good at producing climate protection using machines, we are so safe from climate comparatively to what we used to be. And what's going on is it's not that there have been no impacts on climate, but the benefits of producing all this climate protection, I call this the climate mastery benefits of reliable low-cost energy, have far outweighed any negative side effects. We have to recognize that reality, which almost none of our thought leaders do today. And then the third one relates to how much can we expect in the future? And it's while certain environmental thought leaders have predicted runaway warming and rapid sea level rises, we've experienced only 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree Celsius in the last 170 years. And very slow sea level rises. So just to walk you through this, if you look at the history of our planet, we're not at all in unprecedented levels for CO2. We've had CO2 levels more than 10, probably more than 15 times higher than today. They don't even correlate very well with temperatures. Temperatures at different points in the planet have been 25 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than they are today. And the way it worked, by the way, is it's not evenly spread around the globe. The warming occurs primarily in the colder parts. So it was a more tropical world, a more lush world, a world with more plant growth. So there wasn't anything resembling the Earth burning up. That's just a complete fantasy that could not happen. What could happen is the Earth could get warmer, and we could be concerned that the rate of change was a little fast. But the idea the Earth is going to become unlivable is just complete BS designed to scare people. And the actual climate scientists don't say the Earth is going to become unlivable. They say we think it's going to change more quickly than it has changed in the past. But since we're so adaptable, I don't think there's reason to think that's going to be a huge problem. If you want to put the temperature in context, here's what 2 degrees Fahrenheit looks like over the last 170 years as we've been using fossil fuels. And it's just a tiny shift in a range. We already deal with a dramatic range of temperatures. So it all things being equal, it means the high is a little higher, the low is a little higher. But it's just, we're still fundamentally dealing with a very dynamic climate. And it still just depends on how good are we at adapting to or mastering climate. And with fossil fueled machines, we're very, very good. Sea level rise is another thing that's distorted. Sea levels are rising very, very slowly compared to what they were for our ancestors who had no technology 10,000 years ago. They may be rising slightly less slowly than they were 50 years ago. I think they probably are rising a little less slowly, but there's nothing resembling catastrophe. So this is just a little preview. There's a lot more of this in my book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and in the resources that I'm going to send. But I think the conclusion to draw is that man-made climate impact is real, but it is extremely exaggerated. And for this is in some of the resources I explain more, but the basic reason behind this is that the way the greenhouse effect works, by which CO2 affects climate, is it's not something that accelerates as you get more CO2. So every new unit of CO2 doesn't warm faster than the last, it warms slower than the last. So you get diminishing returns on warming. And that's why I expect some warming, but very manageable warming in the future. All right, so here's my summary of climate, and we're almost ready for questions. So we'll continue to have a warming impact on climate, and we'll continue to overwhelm it with fossil fueled climate mastery. So the overall evaluation, the full context is fossil fuels have irreplaceable benefits and extremely manageable side effects that should make them the leading source of energy for decades to come. And maybe another way to think of it is fossil fuels are continuing to make the world a better and better place to live. The world is a far more livable place today for billions of people than it used to be because of fossil fuels. And if we keep using fossil fuels and expanding their use, the world will be a lot more livable place going forward for billions of people and billions of more people who don't have much energy right now. So in terms of how this relates to policy, I think the two big things are, one is if the US continues and expands our massive production of fossil fuels, life will get better around the world and across the board. And if we try to rapidly eliminate fossil fuels, our lives will get far worse. And importantly, we'll also be far less secure from foreign threats, because without, today we have a domestic energy supply. We're really good at producing oil, which is the most important form of energy for military conflict, because mobility is so crucial for military conflict. The last thing we want to do is be like Europe, dependent on Russia, dependent on the Middle East to the extent that different places are. So it's just so important that we continue producing fossil fuels that we be free to. And of course, that is going to be a real battle going forward. And one resource I've created to help with that battle is called energytalkingpoints.com. You can look at it on your own, or I'll send a link in the resources I send. But what this is designed to do is give you really fast, powerful, well-referenced talking points on virtually any issue. And so that's going to help you take some of the ideas today and share them with other people, talk about them with other people. And I'm going to continue updating that, as well as going forward, I'm going to probably start having weekly calls with elected officials. So if you know any elected officials, tell them to reach out. I'll set up a free call that they can get some custom guidance on. And at some point, I may do a weekly call with industry people to help them with custom messaging. But in any case, right now, you can just go to energytalkingpoints.com and get a ton of valuable stuff. And just with the LinkedIn, by the way I got LinkedIn to retract their stance and to approve my post is I just showed them all the sources on energytalkingpoints.com showing that they were wrong and that I was right. So I encourage you to use this resource. It's really powerful, really backed up with facts, and can help you make the moral case for fossil fuels. So I hope this gives you the moral clarity on what is right and why what you're doing is right, and why it's worth persisting with despite difficult economic conditions, despite opposition. Often in life, the things that are right are things that people think are wrong because their moral thinking is very distorted. This has happened over and over throughout history, and that's what's happening now. But the more moral clarity you have and we have, I think the more satisfaction and motivation you'll have in your work, but also the more persuasive you'll be in the important fights that we have ahead. So thanks for having me. And if we have time for questions, I would love to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Wow, a lot to think about. I think I'm gonna make a couple of comments, and then we're gonna open up and try to work in a few questions. One thing is I like the chart. I like one of the slides you put up from your book that has the a geologic time map on it. Here's the issue, guys. It's a lack of perspective. The planet's 4.5 billion years old. Man's been on the planet for 6 million years. We're wringing our hands about 400 parts per million CO2. Just go back 50 million years to the Eocene, you're looking at 3 times that level. And I think you said in your comments, in one of the most flourishing times of our planet. levels were much, much, much higher. So I don't think and it doesn't correlate with temperature. One of the questions we got on the chat line was, why are people not openly sharing this in the public, and why don't our leaders discuss more about this? Well, I'm going to give you a very cynical answer to that, and I would like for Alex to comment. I think it has a lot to do with trading carbon credits on the Chicago Mercantile and who controls that business. So what they want to do is grandfather people in and start adding regulations to where they discontinue operations, and their grandfathered emissions can be traded openly on an exchange, and people will get super, super, super rich. And unfortunately, none of those people are people that are going to be helpful to any of our causes. So that's the cynical answer. I'd like to hear Alex's thoughts on why people are not talking about carbon emissions from a more realistic standpoint like you are.
Yeah, I mean, that could be true in some cases. You can hear me, right? You can still hear me? Okay,
yes,
great. So I'll go back to the issue of moral clarity. I think in general, where moral clarity exists, people speak out, even if it seems to be against their immediate interests, and where they don't have it, they don't do it. So I like to use the example of the coal industry, which is a really interesting one historically, because the coal industry was known for decades as somebody that you do not dare cross. There was so much, the coal miners as a force. If you tried to cut their wages, be prepared for hell. And they were so righteous about, we do such important work and we deserve to be paid and we deserve a raise. And yet when President Obama declared that he was going to make the industry extinct, there was barely a peep out of the coal industry. So what happened to all of that? They were such good communicators in one context with their wage, but not with the existence of their industry. I don't think they had the moral clarity to deal with the idea that they were making the world a worse place. And I think that the fact that you produce energy does not mean that you understand the value of energy, including its benefits and its side effects. So part of the reason I talk a lot to industry is to try to create that moral clarity. In terms of why isn't it happening? Well, a way to flip that around is to say, let's make it happen. More and more, I'm creating things that are really easy to share. So energytalkingpoints.com, those were used at the highest level this past election season, despite just being out a couple months. And they can be used a lot more as we head into the next Congress. So my view is, if you think these are good points, make them yourself, share resources, talk about the moral case for fossil fuels. But I've created so much stuff on the web. I mean, if you look at my YouTube page, look at Prager University, there are videos of mine that have 21 million combined views. So I just say, one way to think of it is, let's just spread this stuff. And I've deliberately created a ton of stuff that makes it easier and easier for you to share and influence other people. You yourself don't have to be a master persuader, but these shareable resources can help you a lot. So I'd encourage anyone who has a company, share some of my resources with your company. Let them know about the list. The internet makes sharing free, and sharing is the source of all causes succeeding throughout history. Religions, philosophies, social movements, they all involve sharing good material.
Have you had any other, since you mentioned it, opened the door for this, have you had any other than this one incident with LinkedIn, of your voices being silenced in any way on any social platform?
I'm trying to think. I haven't had much. I know there are definitely issues with other people. What I would stress is that I try to be I know that there's those kind of forces there. So I just try to be very factual. And what I try to never do is just make assertions that are not really carefully substantiated. So sometimes I might think something, but if I can't really substantiate it, I won't say it. And it's just that's a whole subject of what's going on with those platforms and what should happen instead. But I don't suppress myself, but I am very careful to have evidence for what I say. But that applies generally in life, because I'm in environments most of the time that are not friendly to fossil fuels. So I need to be very careful to explain things in a way that other people can relate to. It's not like I'm in certain places in Oklahoma where I can expect that everybody is friendly to the cause.
Well, it's funny you say that. Over the last efforts with ourselves and OERB, we've been able to our approval levels as an industry was below 50%. It's now about 2/3. over just trying to do exactly what you've been doing, is just explaining this is how much money we send to schools. This is how much, just giving them the facts, staying very factual, try to be unemotional about it. Just here's the facts. As it's always said, you're entitled to your opinion, but not your own set of facts.
Well, let me say just one quick thing about that, because I think that those things are good to stress, as long as they're not stressed at the expense of talking about the value of energy. So what you don't want to be is like people would perceive the tobacco industry. Oh, tobacco taxes paid for schools and they paid for this. And it's important to know we produce a valuable product. That's why, my speech is all focused on the value of machine food, machine labor, all these things. That's the core value that you produce that people benefit from. Because otherwise, if you mention that and talk about that and then talk about these other things, then they add to it. Otherwise, it seems like there's something to hide. Like, oh, we can only talk about the ancillary effects of what we do, but we can't talk about our product.
Well, Alex, it's more under the context of we're very, very concerned. We know how important our industry is, and we're very, very concerned that just media consumption is causing our younger people, particularly millennials and Gen Zs now, to not consider a career in our industry because of what they're reading and hearing, which is a lot of propaganda. And I can share with our constituents here. I did pull some information from the University of Oklahoma, which has both a geologic geosciences program and engineering program and business program, all with focuses on energy, mostly fossil fuel energy, but all kinds of energy. And looking at 2019 enrollments, we are down on an average across the programs of almost 70% enrollment. It's the lowest in the last decade. So we're very, very concerned that we're not going to get the best and brightest folks. And unfortunately, the baby boomers, myself being the very tail end of it, they're nearing retirement age or have already retired. So we have a big gap, and there's no one to fill it. And so our education messages are a lot about, look, you can have a career. This is important work. What was the number? How many people do not have energy on our planet?
Well, like 3 billion have almost none.
Have almost none. That is a moral imperative to be in this business, and that's the kind of things we need to be talking about.
Yeah, and I agree, and that's a huge issue. And what I've noticed is my own background was, so I was at Duke, which is a pretty high level undergrad school, and I was at a very elite math science high school. And one thing, the reason I'm mentioning that is none of my peers and I considered fossil fuels as a career. Like because it was just considered, oh, this is some dirty thing of the past. Now, of course, I made a career in it in many, and other people that I know from my class who have been persuaded of my ideas would now happily do it. And they're young. What I get very satisfied by is I get letters from people who say, I went into the industry because I learned about the value of energy from you and the unique value of fossil fuels. So the most important things are the value of energy in general, and then the superiority of fossil fuels in particular at producing it for billions of people.
Well, that all makes us feel very good about having you on our program, Alex, because I really believe that this angle is really what our people feel is that they're doing something, making people's lives better, and really just getting beaten down for it. One of our best and brightest just put something on there. Why does the dialogue always framed where if anyone disagrees with an ecological position?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'd say check out. I have a couple of quick answers to this on energytalkingpoints.com in the section on snappy answers. But I think one really important thing is to start out the conversation by getting them to agree. Do you agree we need to look carefully at both the benefits and side effects of anything? Because what you want them to do is to try to quantify things instead of just treat it as binary. Oh, if we're causing any climate change, it's the end of the world or it's nothing. So you're like a believer in catastrophe or you're a denier. And I think if you just have a discussion, most people would say, yeah, is it possible that we can have degrees of impact on climate? I mean, you can even point out, like, look, we've been impacting climate for 170 years. Would you agree the world is not over? So isn't it important one example I use a lot is, isn't it important to distinguish, are sea level is going to rise 2 feet in the next 80 years, as the UN says, or 20 feet in several decades, as Al Gore says? You just need them to weigh it in a scientific way, not view it as a religious thing. Like, oh, either we're impacting things and it's the end of the world, or we're not. So I think most people are willing to do it if you frame it that way. But it is a good question.
But we have to remove the binary out of all of that. So
yes,
Alex, thank you. We certainly I'm encouraged by as usual every time I see you talk or talk to you. So we're gonna shift now. Thank you, Alex.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. Remember to email me if you want resources.
Thank you. I think we're shifting in, and we're fortunate to have we're shifting to a video right now. So let's go ahead and do that, folks.
BITCO, in proud partnership with the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma, brings you the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma Safety Group Dividend Plan. With a track record proven over a century and dedication to the oil patch for more than 75 years, BITCO meets the insurance and risk management needs of industries that are the backbone of the American economy. The Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma brings added value to your association membership by partnering with BITCO. Working with OIPA dating back to 2003, BITCO provides specialized underwriting, risk control, and claims expertise that has helped generate premium dividends in excess of $10 million. What does the dividend program mean to you? A reduction in the ultimate cost of your insurance protection and a reward for providing your employees with a safe work environment. As a member of the Old Republic Insurance Group, one of the 50 largest shareholder-owned insurance organizations in the United States, BITCO provides the peace of mind that comes from being insured by a Fortune 500 company rated A+ by AM Best. BITCO and the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma. We're here for you. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and go to bitco.com today to learn more about our programs, our services, and to find an agent near you.
Again, a great message from BITCO. Thank you. BITCO is also the sponsor for another giveaway. They have picked such a great item. They did it again. It's this Beats pill that they're going to give away, and the winner of this particular one is Kent Warner with Weatherford. Congratulations! And as Brooke said earlier, contact Natalie, Lauren, or the team, and they'll make sure you get your item. Now I'll welcome Brooke back on to the program. I'm going to go ahead and give a little intro, and then Brooke's going to give us a kind of a lay of the land of what the Petroleum Alliance has accomplished this year, where we're headed. As you know, the mission of the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma is to work at all times for the improvement of the oil and gas industry, present our views and viewpoints of our members to elected and appointed government officials in the courts, also to increase understanding among the people of Oklahoma of industry's importance not only to the state but to America and to the world. Fostering favorable industry conditions here so we can attract investment into our state and provide education and services to the Alliance membership network. Brooke is going to come on and talk about, and I'm just going to kind of give him some overall categories of what we're going to hear about. One is about no secret to all of us about how we had to tighten our belts. The Petroleum Alliance did the same thing. He's going to talk a little bit about that. Winning at the state capitol, winning at the ballot box, what our efforts there did for us. Leading the charge in the wake of the McGirt case. He's going to have a few comments about that. we're going to talk later when I tie about fighting for our future here, especially the comments I gave during Alex's Q&A about our young folks. I want to talk a little bit more about that in concluding. What winning regulatory victories looks like. You heard from John and Ann earlier in their segment with Brooke that we're going to be looking at probably a deluge of regulatory changes that we'll be navigating through. And I think the overall message, and we'll tie it up in a minute, is about remaining together. And Brooke, why don't you come on and
all right,
so go through some of these things with our folks here.
Can anybody hear me?
We can all hear you, but can't see you.
Okay, we've had a technical issue on this side, so I'm going to Chelsea. If you'll just walk through those slides, pull them up for me, if you don't mind, and we'll kind of get started on that end. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hit a few highlights as you just mentioned, and then I'm going to kick it back to you to any additional comments. So, first of all, next slide, please, Chelsea. We are in good financial position. We were aggressive in 2020 with our cost reductions. We tightened our belt, reduced our head count, cut G&A expenses. Just like you, we had to learn to do more with less. So we have done that successfully to make certain that we protect our bottom line. At the same time, operationally, we have high-graded our staff, improved some internal processes, boosted our communications, and then we have gotten our committees more fully engaged. The regulatory committee itself has been doing just lights out work. And some of our other committees, if you are not involved in those committees, you need to get involved in them. They are doing just exceptional work, solving problems, in some cases very quietly, heading off issues before they become big issues. On the legislative front, we were very successful with the Produced Water Recycling Act. We had the COVID-19 tort protection for business. And I want to pull in side here to me. You won't be able to see her, but Adria Berry is one of those high-grade hires that we've made in 2020. And Adria, I'd like to just discuss with you a little bit of our successes. Come on up here, and they can't see you, but I want them to at least hear your voice as you talk a little bit about what's kind of going on at the Capitol. We'll ham and egg this a little bit here. Let's talk a little bit about the margins up there after the election in the Oklahoma House and Senate.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, we had a really successful time in the most recent general election. And it's really interesting because the Republicans in Oklahoma really showed their strength by flipping 5 seats during the most recent election cycle. So the state house now has 82 members in its majority party. So keep in perspective that there are 101 members total. And we also need to remember when we think of those 82 members, it takes 76 votes to implement a tax increase, as you all remember from a couple of years ago. So we want to keep that in mind looking towards the legislative session. They were all sworn in yesterday at the Capitol, held caucus meetings earlier this week to vote in some new leadership positions. And out of that vote, interestingly, our energy chair in the House, who we've enjoyed working with, Representative Terry O'Donnell, is now actually the Speaker Pro Tem in the House. So he'll work side by side with Speaker of the House Charles McCall, who we enjoy a really good relationship with as well. The Speaker will decide on who will replace O'Donnell for energy chair very, very soon. And in the Senate, Republicans still hold 39 of the 48 seats in that chamber. So they still have an overwhelming majority over there. There are 23 new members of the legislature coming in. And out of those, our PAC supported 13 of the new members. We also supported a total of 26 state legislative candidates in the general election, and out of those 24 won. So that gave us a 92% success rate on our PAC choices during this last election, and we're really excited about that. So, yeah.
So, Adria, that's fantastic. It's very important to be involved in the Alliance PAC and in the Wildcatters Club. So thank you very much. These successes, that 92% success rate is your success rate. That will definitely help the industry at the state capitol. And frankly, as we discussed in our previous sessions, make certain that we have a bit of a firewall within the U.S. Senate. If we can make certain that Republicans hang on to the U.S. Senate, we can enforce some rationality there. So, Adria, let me ask the question. What's going to be the big driver for this legislative session in 2021?
Well, the number one thing will unfortunately be the budget. The state is looking at about $1 billion budget shortfall, $1 billion shortfall. Unless there's some really good economic recovery in the next few months, that's the number they're looking at. So, one of the things they'll have to address really, really quickly at the beginning of next session is how to fund the expanded Medicaid population that the Oklahomans voted on in June. So State Question 802 expanded Medicaid in Oklahoma. And so the legislature is going to have to figure out how to pay for that. I really don't envy them, Brooke, because they're going to have to make some tough decisions this year. One thing they're surely going to look at is cutting budgets of state agencies. Now, we know, of course, in this industry, how important it is for DEQ and OERB to be fully funded. So we'll definitely monitor that closely and work with the legislature on that. And what we don't want to see in regards to the budget is a tax increase, obviously. So the Alliance will be very clear on that at the Capitol. And we've been having those conversations already, as you know, Brooke.
Great. Well, listen, thank you very much. And I know that our committees have been doing some great work behind the scenes. We're in the process of standing up our legislative agenda for the year, and we'll be back to talk to folks about that as we flesh it out and really nail it down. So I want to switch a little bit here to the regulatory front. We've had some great success on the regulatory front as well, both Chapter 5 and Chapter 10 rules. You can see that up there up on the slide. And Mr. Chairman, we talked about how the committees have been doing such a great job. And I believe that you had a comment just about one of our members who's been just leading the charge, doing fantastic work on the regulatory front. If you can hear me and jump back on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Gosh, we've had a lot of unsung heroes, but there's definitely some standouts. And if we had to narrow it to somebody that's really lit it up, it'd be Mike Mathis from Continental. He could not be a bigger voice and leader for us in working with Oklahoma Water Resource Board. His history there and his consulting history, he's just been almost invaluable. He's also not only a degreed engineer, he can also predict the weather, apparently. I didn't know he had a meteorology degree, but he had that too. Both from the school that's now a 4-year school down there at the University of Oklahoma. I'm always I give my wife a hard time about the Sooner land, but he's just been outstanding. And that whole group, the legislative and regulatory group, has been just phenomenal. I feel like that we navigated some pretty rough tides this year, but I think next year, if what John and Ann said becomes reality, we may be in for the war that we have, for battles that we weren't contemplating. So thank you, Mike Mathis. Anybody that gets a chance to tell him thank you, you do so, because he has really stepped up. And of course, under the overall leadership of Kim Hatfield, who I just simply cannot say enough good about. So we're fortunate to have such a guy. So that's the guy I wanted to point out. Out of so many stars, it's hard to pick one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And Mike, thank you. You're very appreciated all across the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma. Let's switch the slide to the next one if we can, Chelsea. Let's talk about, we mentioned the political wins. The 92% success rate for the Alliance PAC deployment. We do that very carefully. We pick our champions. We build a firewall. We win winnable races. We want your involvement in that. The same is true for the Wildcatters Club. The Wildcatters Club allows us to do more behind the scenes than you can imagine. Some of that stuff we don't talk about a whole lot, but I will guarantee you that it made a big difference. I will mention one place where it made a big difference, and that is a Senate District 43 race when Paul Scott introduced legislation that would have created a very dangerous political dynamic for the industry in Oklahoma. It would basically say that what you do is a health hazard. And that is the camel's nose under the tent for the environmental activists who are just looking for every opportunity they can to shut you down. So please participate in that. We really executed on McGirt versus Oklahoma. The Alliance leaned in. We had, I believe, 5 webinars and teleconferences, special legal briefings, letting your teams know what McGirt versus Oklahoma really meant, what the jeopardy was, the uncertainties associated therewith. We led the national trades with regard to a federal policy position. The fact that we put together some information for the delegation that they could meet to, whether it be AXPC, API, IPAA, U.S. Oil and Gas Association, et cetera, they all were able to point back to Oklahoma and the Petroleum Alliance's work and say, we want what they want. The biggest win that we had on McGirt so far is that we secured state primacy for EPA regulations in Indian country. We worked with state officials to trigger that 2005 federal law that is Oklahoma specific, that said if the state of Oklahoma is administering EPA programs in non-Indian country and they need to do it in Indian country, the administrator of the EPA shall grant that request. And that really has saved our members tens of millions of dollars and countless man hours over the next 3 years, I predict. So we know that we're going to have a new administration. Thankfully, if you look at the congressional makeup, I don't believe that Congress is going to overturn that, as long as we have some folks with eagle eyes out there that are really paying attention to, for looking for monkey business. But that is a huge win that the Alliance delivered on your behalf. And then I want to call out a special thanks to the membership and events team. They really delivered this year when we couldn't get together. They came up with creative ways for us to do successful outdoor networking events, whether it be on the golf course or in our own parking lot. So we have more events planned for you for 2021. The Alliance Open and the Wildcatters Invitational were great successes. And the membership and events team, I just cannot say enough good things about them. They are here early in the morning and they are here late at night. Your team is working for you very diligently, and I appreciate their dedication every day. So with that, let's just flip to the next slide if we can and talk about our 2021 prep. What we've done is we have a very cautious 2021 budget on both income and expenses. As I mentioned, we're anticipating outdoor and social distance events during the first half of this year, thinking about the positive track that we're on with regard to a vaccine. We're going to recommend that we move our annual meeting to early August at the Four Seasons, just to make certain that we capture the success of that vaccine delivery and also capture the industry upslope. We're going to have some additional conversations on that internally and at the board level. It's not set yet, but that's sort of what we're thinking. We don't want to wind up in the same situation we were in spring of 2020 with some uncertainty about what we could do and what we couldn't. So we've increased our digital communications presence, and then we are having some early discussions about what ESG products and services the Alliance may be able to help you with. A lot of our members don't have the bandwidth to put together ESG reports that are going to be required. You don't have the staff. We're going to see if we can come up with some plug and play efforts that make sense. We're in early discussions about that, but I hope to roll out some more news down the line. Now, we need you to be successful in 2021. And that means your membership, your sponsorship, your participation, and your support. We want your feedback. If you have ideas and comments, things that we're doing well, things where we need improvement, we want you to communicate that to us. Natalie Kenmuth is your membership contact, and she is always willing and able to listen. So, and also just pick up the phone and call me. If you have an issue, we want to hear about it. One of the things that we are going to ask of you is we want to make certain that we are identifying where you are working on the charitable front, your philanthropic efforts. And we want to make certain that we amplify your story, and that helps us tell the greater industry story in Oklahoma. Finally, I want to make certain that I call attention to our sponsors and our partners. The Alliance Partner Programs are designed to help you improve your bottom line. The rollout of the Blue Cross Blue Shield AHP for some companies may save you some dollars that will help you keep the lights on. So please pay attention to these partner programs. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to tip it to you. You may have some other things to say.
Thanks, Brooke. I certainly appreciate that. We've had a challenging year, but a successful year navigating some pretty rough tides. I know I said that earlier, but I think I'm gonna conclude it with the following. One, if you're just counting up the wins there, in the millions of dollars that we have saved our constituents and our colleagues. If you're not a member of Petroleum Alliance and you're in this industry, you should be a member of Petroleum Alliance. It's just a laydown. There's no reason not to be. Our governor is fond of top 10 finishes. We're a top 10 producing state. We're keeping America energy independent. Oklahoma is a big part of that. Pretty soon, influences from changes in leadership in Washington are going to play through. And they're going to remoniker certain things, like they're going to call natural gas, my prediction, a transition fuel, although I probably will not be alive when the transition is completed. But realize improved oil and gas prices help all of us. Improved gas prices disproportionately help Oklahoma. We're depending on which equivalency you use, we're 75 to 80% on equivalent basis natural gas. One of the focuses for the next year, I believe that I'm going to pursue wholeheartedly is a focus on our young people. I am alarmed by the information that I have received, and I talked a little bit about it in Alex Epstein's Q&A. Is if we look forward and project 2019 enrollment on an average basis of people that complete the program and get a degree conferred upon them, we're looking at something around 100 folks that will graduate through all energy-related programs at the University of Oklahoma. That should be shocking to everybody. It's shocking to me. I hope that's wrong. We got to not only, when I say our younger people, that includes the people that are already in our ranks, our millennials that are disenfranchised right now. Some of them may have lost their jobs. We want to encourage them, keep fighting the fight. And keep encouraging the next group, the Gen Zers that are, I think the oldest one of those is around 19 years old. They're just starting to decide what they want to do. We want to find leaders in those groups and in those ranks to lean in with us. We all need to be constant advocates for our industry and for the individuals that make up this great industry. Our colleagues, especially those that are struggling, we need to encourage them. We also got to reach beyond our borders. We have some pretty prominent Oklahoma companies that have over time and economic decisions that they had to make for their companies are no longer either the producer they used to be in Oklahoma or they have or quite a bit less or even exited, but they're still members. And because what we do in Oklahoma does not stop at the border, we need to sync up with our other industry advocate groups and collaborate. In some cases, there may even be some talks of the ones that are intra-Oklahoma being merged together again. We showed that we can do that and do it right. So I feel good that there might be some of those things. And just quickly from that standpoint, speaking with one voice, one of the questions in Alex's that came from Alex's presentation is how come people don't talk about this? How come that people don't know these facts? Well, it's up to us to tell them, and it's up to us every day. Tell them through your social media accounts. Tell them word of mouth. Tell them wherever you're at. And I'm very proud of the staff at Petroleum Alliance that they worked very, very, very lean through this time and overcame obstacle after obstacle. And it's something I always like to say: singles win ball games. We won a lot. We put a lot of people on base with an opportunity to score, and it's positive. And it's going to continue to change and morph. We don't know which way, but we do know this: we're resilient. But those who resist change will perish. So we will flex with what's thrown at us, and that's what I think we did this year. I think we did a great job, and I hope. I just basically hope 2021 for everybody is a little more sunlight than we had in 2020. So thank you guys for joining the program today. Later on today, there will be a board meeting that I'll get a chance to talk some more about this to our board itself. But thank you all I hope the program was insightful, fires you up, and let's just keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we do have one more giveaway, I believe. The Blue Cross Blue Shield giveaway there. And again, folks, the Blue Cross Blue Shield partner program is important. We came up with that association health plan to give you guys a chance to save some money. So please circle back with our team on that and with the Blue Cross Blue Shield folks or the AHP, and take advantage of that if it will save you money. Mr. Chairman, I have the script here and I can read it if you'd like.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention it's all 77 counties. The Blue Cross, they've been a partner with us for quite some time. We certainly appreciate their efforts. And this guy that I just saw who actually got drawn out on this. This is one of my favorite guys in the business, but he seems to win a lot of these. This may need some investigation. So the winner of the and I think this is Pods, right? Is this Pods or is this another?
This is AirPods, yes, sir.
AirPods. The winner is Joe Bravetti at Charter Oak. So I'm looking at you, Joe. I'm going to look into that. But right now, you're declared the winner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, and the board will meet later on today, 2 p.m. Very good. Thanks, guys.